And to start off with, we have the chairman of the board of the University of Wyoming trustees, Kermit Brown. Kermit's here walking around, shaking hands. We're glad to see you here, Kermit. Thank you for your attendance.
Good afternoon.
I'm gonna go around and shake hands with everybody.
Just won't get me.
And I'm leaving.
Thank you. No, thank you for leaving. Thank you for showing up. Good deal. Thank you. All right, Elliot, you had said that you had some numbers. Do you want to come back up and enlighten us? When you sit in the second row, it's tough to get out.
So, Mr. Chairman, and I think these numbers have been verified, but the folks behind me will correct me if they are not. But that there were 3 sort of factual questions that were asked this morning about enrollment, and that we wanted to provide at least preliminary data, which again, these may not be 100% exact, but that they're hopefully give you a ballpark sense. So for the question that Senator Scott asked about Part B and Part C enrollment and how that compares to overall population, for March, we have a total Part B and Part C enrollment of 3,126, and that the total birth to 5 population is 37,191. The second question, I'm going in reverse order, I realize, is Senator Rothfuss had asked about TANF enrollment. And the TANF eligible population under 5 years old is 5,000, we estimate at 5,787. And with the number of children served by TANF pre-K, I think we had an estimate of 391. Yeah, so we'll update that if that's not quite right, but that what we have in the data is 391. And then with childcare, again, the total child population birth to 5 is 37,191. The total number of children 0 to 5 years old eligible for CCSP steps 1 through 4 is 6,122. The total number of children served by CCSP steps 1 through 6 is 1,769. And the total licensed capacity in the state is 21,559. And we can obviously email those to you and follow up.
That'd be great if you could email them out.
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, could you go through that last set of 3?
sure. So the total number of children birth to 5 who are eligible for steps 1 through 4 is 6,122. The total number of children served by steps 1 through 6 is 1,769. And the total licensed capacity is 21,559. And again, we'll follow up on those, but that hopefully that provides some preliminary sense and answer to those questions.
All right. Any questions for Elliot? Go ahead, Representative Obermiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that gap between the 6,000 identified kids and the 1,000, is that because the 5,000 just chooses not to avail themselves of the service? Or
Yeah, I mean, we don't, Mr. Chairman, we don't know all the reasons. It may be because they don't want to avail themselves of the service. It may be that they're in a non-licensed care arrangement. There may be any number of different reasons, but that, and states will typically have a gap between those 2 numbers. But that's what we know.
Thank you.
And further questions for Elliot? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, when we finished up before lunch, we were working on early childhood special education funding, and I understand there were some districts that wish to comment.
Mr. Chairman, it's more than just a comment. Recall Chairman Scott wanted some
information from school districts or folks boots on the ground on their preschool programs that they're providing. So they've been gracious enough to present some information on how they provide those preschool programs in their school districts. And so I'll let them continue.
We always enjoy having you guys, especially on the hot seat.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Shane Ogden, Superintendent in Park County School District 16, booming metropolis of Meeteetse, Wyoming. And I'm just sharing our story. So I'm not speaking for other districts or anything like that, but just our story of pre-K in Meeteetse. In 2016, the one child care facility in our town closed up. And at that time, the school district opted to start a pre-K program. I wasn't actually in the district at that time, but that was the beginning of it. And our pre-K program is only for four-year-old students. And of those that are age eligible, we average about 95% of kids that live within our district that are of that age come to our pre-K program. Our pre-K program is housed inside our school. It's right next door to our kindergarten. Our pre-K kids are just seen as regular students of ours. They go to recess with the kindergarten, first grade students. They eat lunch with them at the same time. And it is a full year program. And due to the requests of the parents, our program is a full day program. So they ride the bus with the kids into school and they ride home with the kids after school. So it is a full program. We average about 8 kids in our program. Like I told you, that's 95% of those that are eligible. This year we have 10 kids. It's going to be a booming class coming up here in 14 years or 15 years when they're ready to graduate for us. The way that we have funded this in the past is that the board went out for a BOCES mill levy, and we joined the Northwest Early Childhood BOCES group. And that funding, of course, is based upon the revenues that come into the county. And most years that revenue will cover about half the cost of our program. The average cost to run our program, just looking at supplies, teacher salary and benefits, and the things that they need for that program is roughly $110,000. Last year, with property taxes the way that they were, our mill levy actually paid for the entire program. This year, we've been told it will not. It will be back down to the regular amount. Great for taxpayers, and yet we'll just assume that cost again for our district. We are, one of the benefits that we have truly seen in this is, number one, the kids are just ready. When they come to kindergarten, when we talk about kindergarten readiness, they're actually more like halfway through kindergarten ready, because they're using our same curriculum, they're using our same teachers, certified teacher that's in working with them, and they're getting just good solid doses of that. We are a full Title I school. And with that, we also extend some of those services down to the pre-K kids. So if they are needing some literacy help, then we're doing that. The other thing that we have in Meeteetse is around this same time, well, actually just in the past probably 3 years, our rec district that serves our district, they started a earlier kids program. So that's kids that are 3 and younger. And what we do is we send a teacher, our literacy coach, to them once a week for 2 hours so that the younger kids are getting the literacy intervention pieces and just solid instruction in literacy even at younger ages. And our parents really have been the driving force behind this. part because they needed daycare and part because they just saw a need to get the kids in and are very supportive of our program. So I don't want to take a lot of time. That's our program in a nutshell. And I'd stand for any questions that you might have.
Who's got a question? Representative Brown, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shane, thanks for being here and driving all the way down. Curious on the teacher qualifications for your pre-K. That's one of the things that I've heard expressed by a couple of our pre-Ks and or specifically even our CDCs across the state is competing directly with a school district, and the fact that you guys, and I use you guys as a broad term,
Sure.
sorry, that you guys can pay so much more, right? So when you're hiring for a pre-K teacher, are you guys hiring certified staff for that? And if so, I'm kind of curious if you have that information, where they're coming from. Since I know that Laramie here doesn't turn out a ton of pre-K teachers.
Go ahead, Shane.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, we actually moved our kindergarten teacher down to the pre-K position. And so she is a full certified K-12, or sorry, K-6 teacher. Her focus was on early childhood. We don't have a CDC that, certainly we have them that serve Meeteetse, but not housed in Meeteetse. And so that wasn't an option. However, they still provide services to our kids that do qualify for services. But as far as the employment of that, we just transferred a teacher into that.
So Shane, I gotta ask you, you're working on doing pre-K. What kind of standards or curriculum are you using? Is something you guys developed, or was it off a shelf program, or?
So Chairman Northrop, what the standards that we use is we use the Head Start standards for pre-K. So that's kind of the basis of what we do, is just we based it upon what is required within Head Start. It certainly aligns, we've made sure that what we do aligns with what they're going to be doing in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, so that it's kind of seamless as we progress through that. And so that's the approach that we took with that, was using those national Head Start standards.
You have a question?
Mr. Chairman, Paul, yes. And let me say first, I appreciate you coming and always good to hear from the districts, is what's really going on. Okay, you're using the Head Start standards. What are they? I have no familiarity with that.
Go ahead, Shane.
Chairman Scott, because I don't teach that, I can't tell you specifically what they are, but I'll tell you what I observe when I'm in that classroom. Is that we're really looking at literacy components. So we want our kids, by the time that they leave, we think that because of our size, we want the kids to actually be at the early stages of reading when they leave our pre-K program. So that's word recognition. It's not going to be full reading, but it's the start of that. One of the big elements that we also focus on is the emotional side of coming to a school. And you see a 4-year-old, you see a 5-year-old going into kindergarten, and that's often hard. 4-year-olds are no different, and they have a difficult time. But when they get into a system and start to have a routine, it's amazing how quickly they just adopt that. And we've had parents comment that when summer comes, those kids are used to that routine that they have every day. And so if they're not getting lunch right at 11:15, the parents are like, I had to rearrange things to provide them the lunch when they're used to having it. There's also number recognition. So when we're talking about numeracy, we're wanting to make sure that there's some number recognition. I don't know that could happen in every pre-K. We're talking about one teacher and 8 kids, which makes that a lot more possible. That's why I want to speak just for Meeteetse. But those are kind of the big things that we're looking at for kids to be able to do that.
Further questions? Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just curious, in your case, what the trade-offs have been in order to fund the preschool program what gives on the other side of that equation?
Go ahead, Shane.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermueller. It's just a piece that we continually to have discussions about on an annual basis as we're figuring out our budgets and taking it to our board to approve. Are we going to be able to continue to support half of that pre-K program that we've been doing? Where that money comes from is we have fewer clerical people. We have fewer district office people. We're a little bit smaller. We can get away with that maybe. And so just within the whole block funding, it's just pieces here and pieces there that allow us to do that.
Further questions? Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you about kind of revisiting something from this morning about the department working on some ideas of what kindergarten readiness looks like and some things like that. Do you feel like that would help you as you continue to grow and improve your program if you had a little bit of that kind of guidance of from the state regarding what really is kindergarten readiness?
Go ahead, Shane.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, as you probably heard me in the past, I'm a huge proponent for local control. And I think allowing our local board to determine what that is probably the best thing for us. Because it may be a little different for us than it might be in another location. And so I will always side towards local control on those issues.
Thank you.
Further questions from Shane? All right. Well,
Thank
let's
you.
Hear what Lovell has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. Doug Hazen, Superintendent in Bighorn number 2, which is up in Lovell. I came to share our story, a little bit unique in that we just started our preschool last year. So this is, we just finished 1 year of a district-run preschool. So we have that lens to look at it from. As many of the comments came this morning, our why of the reason we did that was really we had seen in our elementary school that we had been a district exceeding expectations and starting to see that slip specifically in reading. And as well, coming out of the COVID, which has been a large narrative for a lot of things, we were hearing our kindergarten teachers talk about behavior concerns, kids not being quite as developmentally ready, barriers to learning. And so we started ours, and I'll try to touch on some of the answers to what I think might be questions as I go, since I was trying to listen. We started that. We applied for an Albogan grant, which we received a 3-year. It's actually a graduate grant, so we tied it back to high school graduation, but the early intervention portion of that. So part of it is funded through that, and the other part is funded through ESSER right now. So one of our pieces is I don't have a sustainable funding source moving forward. ESSER's ending, and then Albogan will run out in 2 years. But ours is a half day, morning and afternoon. So Lovell's a bit bigger than Meeteetse. We kind of capped ours at 30. At the end of the year, we were serving 27 kids. And so we tried to split it approximately 15 in the morning, 15 in the afternoon. I would say another part of our why we reached out, we do have what we call a CRC, or Children's Resource Center, in our community. We had a Head Start. And then we have a number of private providers that offer daycare with maybe some preschool-like components to theirs. So we tried to reach out to all of them. Of course, trying not to step on toes is difficult in a small community. Through that dialogue, we found out that our local Head Start was going to close. And so in the end, the timing ended up to be right. We started ours then with the intention to offer a free preschool to any family in need, because we wanted to fill that void that was being left by Head Start. So we offer meals to our kids. We offer transportation, which is another issue because that's another cost to the district that's not necessarily reimbursable, because we don't have kindergarten age or above kids always on those buses, especially our midday route. But we offered all of that in an effort, really our message to our community was we want every kid to have the opportunity to go to a high quality preschool. And we have some high quality ones other than us there. I want to make that clear, but wanted to be able to serve. We tend to have about 50 kids per class coming into our school system. And so we've been able to do that. Anecdotally, I would tell you, similar to what Shane shared, it's in our elementary school, in our kindergarten wing. We have a certified pre-K teacher that we hired. They're on our district salary schedule. They eat lunch in the cafeteria. So we have not come back from that first year to see how they compare to students that weren't in our preschool or any of that. We'll have that soon. But again, anecdotally, I would say most of our teachers would tell you they know how to walk in the halls, which are small things that can have pretty major impacts later on. They know how to carry a tray and open a milk and go out to recess. They know how to behave and function in school much differently. Again, I think their instruction has been very high quality. To talk about curriculum, again, it's mostly district created. We looked at a variety of standards, but mostly, again, it started with a concern we had from elementary reading all the way up. And so we've pared that back all the way, trickling it back down to make sure for our specific reading program, they're getting some of the tools they need to be successful that first year in kindergarten. And so that's how we've structured it. I did not only bring some anecdotal, but some of the things that our teacher looked at were things like how many kids could count items up to 10 when they first came. That was about 40% to begin the year. It was at 90% to end the year. Identifying numbers 0 to 10 started at 1%. I don't know how they got 1% because that doesn't seem mathematically right to me, but got to above 60%. Then other things like recognizing simple patterns started at about 35% of our kids could do that, ended up at 95%. So again, I have some more of that info if you would like it. But we did see not only some anecdotal evidence that this was helping our kids, but also some real data as well. And we're excited to get more as we go further into this. And again, as I said, just a few challenges. We don't have a sustainable source. Title I, of course, is going to be an option, but we already are a Title I school utilizing all those Title I funds for something else. And so if we did transition to that, something would give there. TANF grant would be another opportunity for us along with applying for maybe other grants. But that, and as I mentioned, just transportation or to offer what we want to offer to our community to do the right thing. Of course, it just has implications for the district on the financial end. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Representative Berger, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Superintendent. Quick question then, you're offering this program to your entire community, not just your employees that need childcare, or do you see it, or do you see both?
Mr. Chairman, correct. Is offered to our entire community, is not just for employees, not just for childcare. Now, again, we did partner a bit with our daycares. So for instance, many of our daycares are only AM daycares. And so we send our bus to those daycares, and many of those families select the PM option so that they have, in essence, daycare the whole day, even though they're coming to our preschool in the afternoon. So we've tried to build community partners that way, but it is not solely for our employees. And again, we're a half day, just to be clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my final question then, I think you said, I hear you correctly, you're funding it all, or are you asking parents to fund any of your program? Because I think there are some school districts out there that offer services, but still have a tuition for their child care. I'm seeing heads raised, yes.
Yes,
So anyways,
Mr. Chairman, ours is fully funded by the district partly because of Head Start closing, and just for our community, we wanted to make sure that a financial piece was not a barrier to any kid entering our preschool. And so it is of no cost to anybody that attends our preschool.
Representative Lawley, please go ahead.
Thank you. And you may have mentioned this, but what is the total universe of students that would have been eligible? Did you say 50, usually a class roughly?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, approximately each grade level for us is approximately 50 students. So for our high school has 4 grade levels, about 200 kids. So that's generally our incoming class. It varies, but yes.
Okay. And follow up.
Go ahead.
It's actually kind of more of a separate question, but regarding the closing of the Head Start, I think I had actually heard about that happening. Would you guys be eligible then to apply possibly to basically for the grant for Head Start and incorporate that into what you're doing as a possibility?
Go ahead, Doug.
I don't know that answer. It's possible. But we had, of course, at this point, we have not looked at that because we had both that ESSER and El Bogan grant, but it's something that I will certainly look at for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, Representative Clouston has a question.
Representative Clauston, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ashley. So, Superintendent, any idea what percentage of your students qualify for free and reduced lunch?
Go ahead, Doug.
Yes, at our elementary, approximately 40%.
Anybody else? Questions? All right. Thank you. State your name and district and start in.
Mr. Chairman, Carol Jellicoe. I am Sweetwater County School District #1, Chairman of the Board. And so I have some information regarding, we started with a Head Start. And to answer the question, I don't know how we got that, because my understanding is we are one of 2 Head Starts in the country that are associated with the school district. They're usually independent entities. So ours is under the direction of our Board of Trustees. We have a trustee that sits on their policy council as one of her committee assignments. And basically our Head Start has half-day and full-day options. So I think we have 2 half-day options and then 3 full days. So we're capped at 100 students for our Head Start program. And this is 3 to 5. But we found that we had a waiting list of 50 or 60 students. There's a dire need for childcare in Rock Springs, Sweetwater County. So about 4 years ago, we started planning, and due to some school consolidations that we did, we had an empty school. Actually, it's right across the street from our central administration building. We totally remodeled that building for early childhood. I mean, when you go in, each of the classrooms has a bathroom. They have these little tiny toilets in them. They've all been fully remodeled. We are fully licensed with community, local, state, and federal requirements. So we had, when we talked about this school, we had 2 goals. One, to improve the kindergarten readiness, 3rd grade reading scores, and ultimately to improve graduation rates. So it was a K-12 kind of thing. The second goal was to recruit and retain quality staff. And in some cases to keep staff if they had a child. And so many cases, the childcare in the community was so high in cost that it didn't make any sense for the parent to stay home, to teach and pay childcare when they could stay home and take care of the childcare themselves. So we've been able to keep quality staff by doing that. So in August of 23, beginning of the 23-24 school year, we moved our Head Start building into a wing of this new school, well, remodeled school, I should say. And then we opened a daycare and preschool in the other wing. We have one principal that oversees all the programs in the building. We have two directors. One directs the Head Start programs, and the other one directs the daycare and preschool programs. For parents, we've reduced the daycare costs for employees due to the majority of the grants that we're using. So we use a lot of grant funding. We use some IDEA, B and C funding, where with the Head Start, we can use I think it's the B funding, the 3 through 21. And then we've been able to use some funding for the birth to 3-year-olds with some of the C funds. When we started thinking about this program, we kept getting inundated by local daycares that we were going to take away their business, that, you know, it was going to decrease their options. And so they found it as a conflict of interest for the school district to do this. What happened is that they didn't lose anything, because the people other than our teachers and our staff, their losses, the people that we have as clients, as our students, can't afford the daycare that those places are serving. So we're actually bringing new students into the system because they couldn't afford the daycare that was available in the community if they could get it at all. So it didn't impact them. Students who have children in our high schools, if they need daycare, we provide that daycare and preschool at no charge. We have grants so that we can waive those costs that would be normally passed on to them, so that our students that are in high school can finish high school. That helps our graduation rate, and at the same time provides quality care for their children. So in January of 2024, we actually secured a local BOCES grant to help fund 2 additional classes to help reduce the waiting list. We still have a waiting list of up to 20 students moving forward. The facility, as I said, is fully licensed, meeting all local, state, and federal requirements. And just last month, Uintah County School District, not Uintah County CDC, approached us about applying for a joint grant with them. They have an early Head Start program. We have the Head Start program. So by joining into this grant, and I think it's a 5-year grant, I believe it's for $5 million, we're going to get an early Head Start program out of it, and they're going to get a Head Start program out of it. So we've gone together jointly for that, and we're hoping for approval in late July or early August so that we could proceed with using some of that funding to help offset the the birth to 3-year-old program. I stand for questions.
Committee, anybody have a question? Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. Jellicoe, for being here. And question, if let's say maybe the state does, or the legislature maybe starts helping and seeing a need for early childhood care. And a lot of you out there use those grants and apply for grants. Would that make you less likely to apply for grants? Or does that make you continue that hard work for those grants, and then, hey, whatever the legislature can do or the state could do, that's great too? Does that make sense?
Well,
Go ahead, Ms.
Mr.
Jellicoe.
Chairman, I think one of the things that we try to do is continually try to improve the program. So I think from our perspective, we would continue to seek those grants wherever they're available. Just because if we could expand the program, like I said, there's still a dire need for childcare in Rock Springs, and that need is not going away anytime soon. So if we can serve, and we do have room in this building for some expansion. So I would say that we would continue to try to find grants to help us, expand that program.
Go ahead, follow up.
So my understanding is you wouldn't lax your efforts on continuing to improve and continue to find funding elsewhere as well, or adding to your program, right?
Mr. Chairman, I would think not.
Representative Brown, please go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Jellicoe, thanks for being here, making the trip across I-80. I hear the terminology kind of being interchanged a whole bunch, and I want to make sure that I understand clearly from where you're coming from your community. I keep hearing that the terminology childcare
Mhm.
and then preschool. And I really want to make sure we differentiate those two, because they're two totally separate entities, right? And so the program that you started up is strictly for educating children starting at what age?
Birth, Mr. Chairman.
ahead.
Birth. We have infants.
So you're providing, Mr. Chairman, follow up, please. So you're providing educational services at the school district level. And I want to make sure I also heard this correctly from you, that the child care facilities in your district did not see an impact from that?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. There was such a need, and like I said, the expense for the child cares, our Head Start programs and our child care are not impacting those child cares at all. There's still waiting lists for our groups as well as their groups. So we've maybe made a dent in the need, but we haven't met the need.
Thank you. And so when you just said our groups, I remember you talking B and C funding.
Mhm.
Is this also open to the general public, not just those that need B and C funding capabilities?
Mr. Chairman, the Head Start program is based on poverty levels. Okay, so that is community-wide. Okay, our childcare and our preschool is aimed primarily at employees so that we could recruit and retain quality people. But at the same time, if we're able to expand those programs, then we could expand them. Now, that daycare and preschool are paid for by the parents, but at a reduced rate because of the grant money that we do have, so that it makes it more affordable for our employees as opposed to going out and, like I said earlier, mothers actually leaving the workforce because it was less expensive for them to take care of their child than it was to pay for the child care and work.
Berger, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairperson, Board Chairman Jellicoe. I believe Western Wyoming Community Colleges is doing probably the same for or very close. Can you answer for that, or just you've heard?
Go ahead, Ms.
Mr.
Jellicoe.
Chairman, I believe they have had a preschool for their employees, employees and students for years as well.
And final question, how is this done, or how do you see this has helped retain or even recruit staff in your, obviously it's probably not just for teachers, it's for all staff, and how has that helped you? Is that an important tool for you guys?
Mr. Chairman,
Please go ahead.
it is for all staff. So it becomes really critical for some of our classified people who, teachers have a higher salary, so they might be able to afford some of these daycares that our classified people could nowhere touch. So, and we do provide the same programs for our Head Start program, again, going by the Head Start standards, but we keep, we're teaching educational skills, literacy, numbers, colors. As a matter of fact, our pre-K kids are doing a lot of things that kindergartners used to be the level of expectation for a kindergartner that is moved down 2 or 3 years now. And the expectations for kindergartners are so much greater that if a child doesn't really have any preschool, they're behind before they get started.
Further questions? Okay. We'll hear from Albany County. Please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, my name is Kate Kniss. I'm the Chief Academic Officer here in Laramie, Wyoming, and I'm joined by our Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Hardesty, and we're going to give some information about our preschool and childcare programming. So to delineate the difference between the two, we have two very distinctly different program structures that exist within our system. All of our programs that we are currently offered are anchored in intervention programming disposition. So we have set up our programs very deliberately as interventions. So to give you a little bit of quantitative background on why that is, we have been running preschool programs in our schools for decades at this point in time. We started with partnerships through a TANF grant in Natrona County that shifted over to Albany County. And then most recently, we've taken that into our own school system structures. We have seen consistently, and I'll speak a little bit to our most recent year's data, all of our students were scoring not at risk in our early screeners. So in that question about kindergarten readiness, one of the things that we do measure very closely at the start of kindergarten is to screen on literacy skills. And in particular, we're very interested in those that are most highly indicative of future success or challenges. So letter names and letter sounds, students' identification of irregularly spelled words, all of those screening areas, our most recent cohort, the 22-23 cohort, all of the students who were entering from an on-site preschool, those students were on target. We did not have any risk identified, as opposed to areas that were as high as 35 to 40% high risk incoming from our general population. So I know one of the things that you've been interested in is that juxtaposition of what's happening for students in the on-site programming versus students who may be coming from other preschool programs or no preschool background at all. And so our choice to really focus on intervention is to leverage that opportunity for early intervention as early as possible, because we do see very, very high success rates of utilizing the preschool program for that purpose. We run 2 right now preschool programs in the district. Our preschool programs are housed at 2 of our full school Title I buildings. Those full school Title I buildings run different programming structures. I think we heard earlier this morning from many families, especially families that are trying to balance working and leveraging as much time with their young children as possible. A full day program is not ideal. So we have one site that runs 2 half-day programs, morning and afternoon, and a site that runs a full day program for students, so that we have some opportunity to best match programming structure through, again, that intervention lens. So our focus is always on how do we utilize that preschool structure as an intervention to get students on track, both mathematically and through the literacy lens, as early as possible. We also run a child care program here in Laramie and one in Rock River. The child care program on the intervention end, I think we've heard from other buildings, is exclusively for high school students who have children. So it is a dropout prevention measure that we utilize to make sure that those students are able to continue school with minimal impact for them, or for families who are qualifying as homeless families within our community. That is the only set of enrollment criteria that we hold for the program that is here in Laramie. At Rock River, that is expanded as a function of the size of their community and community need, which I think we've heard from a couple of the other smaller communities, that the needs and the distribution of resources is very different for them than it is for us here in Laramie. So we have those 2 parallel parts of our programs. We house them very differently. I think for the reason that Representative Brown had brought forward, it can get very tricky to be clear about where we are focusing our academic efforts as opposed to those childcare efforts. And so our childcare programs are housed separately, and they're structured separately from our preschool programs here in town.
Senator Rothos, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Can you briefly describe the funding for the pre-K programs? I think you use a blend of a few different funding sources for them, but I think it's important to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, our programming is exclusively actually run out of Title I-A. So because they are prevention and intervention measures, we are utilizing Title I-A funding. I think we've heard throughout the morning, one of the things to be aware is that there are lots of programs targeted at very specific populations of students. And one of the challenges for us has been just those numbers I shared at the beginning. So we don't have a distribution of kindergarten readiness data when we screen incoming kindergartners that would say the only population that needs help or needs academic support are low SES students. ELL students are not the only students that need support. We have many families who fall in kind of what we would call an invisible zone. So they're outside of qualification places. In terms of criteria, they're working families, they're families that don't have access necessarily to high cost programs. And in Laramie in particular, I can speak for, it is an extremely expensive place to get childcare and preschool services. We have sort of that invisible zone of families that we're really working on expanding funding for. So our business manager is here with us today. She has been working with us to try and shift to some general funding as well. I think one of the questions that came forward earlier was what the cost is to us when we do that. When we utilize Title 1A, those funds then mean there is one fewer interventionist for the K-5 population, because we have chosen the intervention of early childhood education. The same thing is true when we utilize general fund, but when we utilize general fund, we have a bit more flexibility on identification criteria so that we capture more of those families and students that might be in sort of that lost space. They don't quite have the appropriate or ideal pathway forward.
Quick follow-up. I thought some TANF funds were used for the classes that Title I was being used for also.
That's a great question. So when I had mentioned we previously were in a TANF agreement with Natrona County, and that moved over to our local school district. We ended our TANF agreement last year, and part of the reason for that was the very restrictiveness on the identification of families. So we sit, I think, as you've heard from other folks, we have a massive waiting list for preschool programming, as do many other providers in our community. And so we ended the TANF partnership so that we could expand who we could allow access to, because the enrollment criteria requires a distribution of free and reduced lunch qualification. And in some cases, we are working with families to get them to fill out the paperwork, to get them to qualify. And because this is an intervention program, one of the things that we are very deliberate about is that the program is most targeted for students who need support with transition. So we have had lots of efforts in our states to really increase the coherence between preschool programming and K-5 programming. We are very deliberate about trying to create that cohesion. And so the inclusion of students at their home school was also very important to us. If they can go to their neighborhood school for preschool programming, it reduces the transition impact for them moving forward. So that was historically true. It is not currently true for us.
Quick follow-up on that, Mr. Chairman. For the TANF funds, were you not able to identify some students as TANF eligible and then fill the rest of the classroom with Title I, for example, or use general fund? Are there strings or restrictions on who else is in the classroom sufficient that you were?
So yes, I think there are multiple dimensions to the complexity, and I think we have lots of folks in the room who also utilize TANF funds. So it is both the population distribution in the programming, because we have such a large population of students. And to be very honest with you, at least for us, we have multiple programs that serve students that are in the same TANF subset. So we have developmental, we have Head Start, we have kind of the same population being pulled into repeat programs. And what we don't have are opportunities for students who sit on the cusp of that identification. And because the distribution of enrollment had to be a certain percentage fit that profile, and then we can backfill, what we were finding is that the backfill wasn't flexible enough to fulfill the needs of all of the students that we had. And as I said before, we continued to see that those were high impact preschool programs, and we wanted to try and expand that. In addition to just restrictions on how our programming is structured, reporting, things like that. So trying to streamline and increase efficacy through utilizing more similar funding sources also was a need.
Chairman Scott, please go ahead.
You mentioned early on that you were seeing quite a improvement in the readiness of the kids when they came to kindergarten. I've heard that from I don't know how many sources. That seems to be very common. I've also heard that the effect fades with time. And by the time you get into the later primary grades, you can't tell the difference between the kids that had the good early start and the kids that did not. Are you seeing the same?
Good.
I think one of the things that I might offer is just that when we think about what happens in school, one of the tricky parts of trying to say what the causal part would be, or like whether the impact continues, is we didn't ever measure the student as a behind student. They came in ready and they continued to move forward, which ultimately for us means when we structure intervention resources, that was one fewer student that needed K-5 resources because they were on target, and we used those to get other students on level. So the comparator does tend to fade, but honestly, that's typically because school then is utilizing their resources for the students who didn't get access to those earlier interventions in terms of the acceleration, because they don't necessarily accelerate faster as a function of coming in on target.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So you think that if you didn't have these kids coming in well prepared, you'd have to spend more resources that you're now using on the other kids?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
So I have a question, and it's actually going towards the end. Talk about your dropout rates and also talk about your graduation rate. How do they compare to the districts the same size in the state?
For us, we don't necessarily, that is one of the questions that had been posed to us originally in terms of like impact of the child care program. Because the child care program is providing opportunities that are linked to dropout prevention for us, we do track for students whether or not they have stayed in high school. We don't necessarily always see them make it through graduation in the long term, partially because part of that population too is usually going to our alternative high school. So there are typically many, many factors at play, and we are doing everything we can to remove each barrier we can, which may or may not be sufficient to keeping them there. We have not had, currently, we do not have any students who have students in our child care program. We have McKinney-Vento qualifying families in the program right now. We will, going into next year, we have 3 expectant mothers where we anticipate taking their children in, where we'll be able to then more closely track what the threshold point is for when they choose to leave school, or if they choose.
Thank you. Representative Provenza, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe this was partly similar question, but because we've had the pre-K program essentially for decades now, do we know graduation rate differences for those that attended pre-K compared to those that didn't?
I do not have those numbers. We could go back and look at students that have been in our in-school pre-K programs and graduation rates for them. Absolutely.
Follow-up?
Yeah, and then second question would be, if I can remember, it may have just escaped my brain. I think it did. I'm very sorry. We'll come back to it.
Go ahead, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering, so you talked about some of the grants you were utilizing, and then you talked about the general fund. Where does the general fund come from?
Go ahead, Kate.
That comes from our block grant funding. So we utilize some of those funds in order to loosen some of the identification criteria. So when we identify students through Title 1A, we cannot only use free and reduced lunch status, but we do use that along with ELL status, migrant, different qualifiers. And from there, we then use the general fund to offset some of that programming cost so that we can open the enrollment for a broader population of students.
Okay, so you're using school foundation program account money for that?
Yes.
And then how, in a general term, how much do you think of the general fund are you using per year?
We would use about half of an FTE
on each child?
In total.
In total,
Mhm.
okay, all right,
Yes.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Representative Lawley, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Very helpful information. I want to go back to the issue that Senator Scott raised about this concept of fading. What does that mean to you, that term of the effect of it sort of fading after a period of time for a student? how would you define that? What are you looking for to determine that? Could you do that first, and then I do have a follow-up after that.
Go ahead, Kate.
Well, I will maybe give my interpretation. It may be a misinterpretation of how he used the terminology. What I think is being implied is that when we have a cohort of students who enter kindergarten, so if we think about the students who came into kindergarten, they come along a spectrum of achievement. And that's that spread or spectrum of achievement. If we have a student who went to preschool, that's shorter. They might be closer to their cohort peers. They might be in line with their cohort peers. What will happen, or the way I interpreted the question, is that the fade then is other students are catching up to them as they move. And so they don't stay so far ahead on the line anymore. Everybody is kind of compacting in that. And so you see the fade of impact. The impact was they started on target, but they didn't accelerate to be now beyond target. They didn't move beyond. So the way that I would interpret that is our responsibility at minimum, not our ideal, but our responsibility at minimum, is to maintain expectations of staying on target. We want every student to be moving along that progression on target. And when a student doesn't enter there, we offer resources to the extent we can to get them there. And so the fading that I would say I think typically happens is other students are in fact catching up to that gap as part of our obligation, but they don't necessarily move always at the same rate. And I think there are many complex reasons why that happens. Things that we know about acquisition of certain types of skills at different levels for students and ages at levels would mean that your pace of movement is not linear, it's not static. And that because our obligation is to focus on making sure students move in line with the expectation, when they stay at expectation, that's what we want. We don't typically track for like, oh, we're expecting you to start failing necessarily, but they won't inherently stay as far ahead of not on target peers as at the start of kindergarten. That just is inherently would only be indicative that we're not doing our job for any other students as well.
Thank you. A follow-up, Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, thank you. So is there any other intervention that you know of where we expect there to just be one strategy for a student throughout their time in a public school system?
I don't, and I don't believe that we would expect there to be one in this case either. We just utilize a very high impact starting point in order to minimize the amount of resource that's taken to serve those students. So what is known about intervention for students is that as they progress, I think your legislation reflects this, as they progress in the grades, it becomes harder and harder to close achievement gaps. So our best and most responsible use of resources is to target them most intensively at the earliest points that we possibly can, because it is both the most efficient and the most effective way to impact very high leverage and important foundational skills for them.
Would you agree then that the fade is a factor, but that really the only way we could know the effectiveness of these high impact early strategies is if we had a control, another person, just like that student who did not have them, and then we looked at that data? Wouldn't that be the really the way to know the true impact?
That would probably be the best in terms of the long term. We do track that as an incoming benchmarking. We look at the difference between students who've been in our preschool programming as opposed to students who have been in other programming, whether that is structured or unstructured. But we don't typically then continue to keep them as isolated cohorts in comparison.
Yeah, thank you.
Chairman Scott, you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, a control from a statistical point of view is very useful. But in this case, you have an obligation to all the kids to bring them along as best you can. And the argument here is that you need less resources for the ones that come in well prepared, so you can do more for the other kids. And it would be unethical to keep the level of services down to the other kids to get your control. And that's statistically, that's the problem, but that's the way the real world has to operate.
Sure.
Thank you. And I understand that. My point being that the fade is limited in its value to give us insight into the value of the of the early intervention for that, any individuals, particularly individual student. And so that, I just wanted to make that clear that those are two different things. And I totally agree that it would be wrong to do it in that way, but we really can't know. Just the fate itself is a factor, but is not necessarily give us all the information that we think it does in terms of the effectiveness of early intervention.
Representative Provenza, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recalled what I was trying to get clarification on. You mentioned early on in your presentation that we've consistently seen that all students come out on target when they've gone through this program. And you mentioned a 35 to 40% like student risk number. Can you just maybe repeat that or clarify for me so I know exactly what you meant by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as is mandated, we screen all of our students as they income to kindergarten. So when they enter kindergarten, we are screening students across a variety of indicators in terms of where they are on the spectrum of risk for being on target for literacy outcomes at the end of the year. So for us, when a kindergartner comes in within the first weeks, if not month of school, they are being screened to identify their letter names and letter sounds, whether or not they have any knowledge of irregular words, how they do with phonemes. Those are the sounds of letters, the beginning sounds. We're screening all of those things to determine the level of risk for students so that we can start making determinations about where resources go, what interventions or structures students might need. So that those numbers that I gave are specific to some of those most consequential early indicators. So we also know not all of the things that we screen are equally predictive. So our best correlations tend to be initial sounds and phoneme segmentation for incoming kindergartners. Those subsets for us tend to sit about 30% high risk to moderate risk for students that are incoming, which is then not paralleled for students who come from our on-site programs.
Follow up?
Somewhat separate question. On kindergarten readiness, what mechanism do you use? Is it one that you've developed as a district, or do you have one that you've purchased?
We do not use a purchased mechanism. We look specifically at whether or not a student is coming in, and we ask the teachers. So teachers who are have incoming kindergarten students, they do a reflection as students come into their programming. We ask them specifically to give some input on whether or not students are coming in with self-regulation, the ability to sit. I think we've heard from lots of different folks, like there are lots of academic skills that are highly consequential to hitting the ground running. They look at and report on those fronts. In addition to the academic screeners that we do as part of the initiation, we do not screen students before the start of the school year. We find that it is very difficult to catch them all. So we tend to do that right as the school year is starting to get a good baseline of where students are incoming. But for us, the readiness is a dimension of overall preparedness along with specific aspects of their academic dispositions, self-regulation, and academic skills.
Okay, you guys have anything else?
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I would just say that we had identified some very specific topics that both Dr. Kniss and I were going to talk through, and through your in-depth questioning of Dr. Kniss, it sort of let me off the hook. So I appreciate that because you took most of it. So the only thing I would add is I appreciate the conversation being had at this level around the topic of preschool for all students, rather than school districts possibly have a little more flexibility within funding sources that they're using to be able to either offset that cost for the school district, but also for employees and for the families within our communities. It costs a lot to send kids to preschool, and that results sometimes in an impact on our workforce because our educators elect to stay home with their children. And that means that we no longer have those high quality teachers in those specific positions because they're at home, because they can no longer afford the preschool programming. Just thank you for your hard work, and I'll leave it with that because we've been here for a while. So.
Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, on staffing and qualified staffing, highly qualified staffing with your pre-K program? Are they certified teachers? Are they certified? And do you pay them, are they on the same pay scale as your certified teachers? Are they do you utilize the University of Wyoming as far as students who are going into teaching programs, that kind of stuff? I remember I did that when I was going to school here, and I'm just wondering those kinds of things. And if you briefly give us an answer on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
Representative Berger, we do have certified teachers in those programs, and they're paid on the certified teacher pay schedule.
I might offer, we tend to couple them with paraprofessionals so we can increase the service rate. So we'll put a certified teacher in a classroom alongside a paraprofessional so that the number of students is expanded pretty substantially as opposed to what it would be if we had a single teacher running the program. And then in our childcare programs, we do look for childcare certification, the CDA certification, but those are run by paraprofessionals, not certified teachers.
Okay, anything else?
Thank you.
Is there any other district that would like to report in on your pre-K or how things are moving along? If not, we'll go to public comment. Go ahead, sir, please. If you'd like to comment, please come up and sit in the chairs. Please state your name for the record and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kerry Greaser. I'm from Laramie. I've been in the childcare business and a provider here in Laramie for about 40 years. And I'm here today to talk about my business, but also to make a couple of specific requests for your committees to consider while they're thinking about the legislation that you've outlined here. I strongly recommend that you consider the effect that it will have on childcare businesses in Wyoming, and particularly infant and toddler care. I think that's something that really needs to be discussed with DFS because those two things are pretty linked. And I also recommend that you include private preschools in your distribution of funding through the educational savings accounts. The bills as it's written, as I've read, does not specifically exclude private schools, but it also does not include private schools. And it's my opinion that if they're not included, they will probably be mostly funding school districts. My business is Basic Beginnings, and as I say, I opened about 40 years ago. I operate 2 centers in Laramie with my partner, Jan Lawrence. We offer care for children from 6 weeks to 11 years old. We open at 6:30 in the morning, which is about an hour and a half before the public schools open. We provide transportation to and from all public schools. We're open until 6 at night, which is about 3 hours after the public schools close. Most of our families also do not operate on the 9-month schedule, although many do because of the university. We are open on weekdays, 12 months a year, with the exception of 6 days for the major holidays. We have 2 locations, as I mentioned. We are nationally accredited, which you've heard about earlier as a TANF requirement. And we pride ourselves on offering high-quality infant and toddler care. Our goal is always that we will have the same adult with the child from the time they start at maybe 6 weeks until they're 3. A standard that is really state of the art in our industry. We offer programs also with degreed certified early education teachers. We accept DFS subsidy
for low-income families, and we also are part of the TANF program and have been for about 20 years. The TANF program, as you know, provides high-quality preschool to low-income families, qualifying families at no cost. We use what a creative curriculum is called, which is a curriculum that is specifically designed for early childhood and allows our children, when they're ready for the kindergarten readiness assessment, which is required as part of TANF, to move them on to public school. We also transport children from home child care centers, where they may be because of cost or other factors, to a TANF preschool program. We have recently partnered with the developmental center here in Laramie to make sure that there are more TANF preschool slots available. We also feed the children breakfast, lunch, and a snack as part of the USDA adult and child and adult care food care program. Well, the child care business is complicated. We're strictly regulated by both the federal government and the state government. And that especially is part of our employment issues. If we have somebody that's sick and can't come to work, it is not an option for us to not have that adult in that room, the correct number of adults in the room with the child. We have to have an extra employee in that case, and it happens all the time. I'm not saying that we disagree with the numbers, because we don't, because it's part of the safety of the children, and we want to make sure that the children safety is our first concern. But that also increases the cost, particularly of infant and toddler care, by about 50%. As you heard earlier, the child care community in Wyoming is shrinking. My business really is still recovering from the pandemic. As you may recall, we were closed by order of the governor for many months. And after coming out of that, it's taken a while for the children to return to our centers. We're still not up to pre-pandemic levels in number of children. And also the labor difficulties that you've heard about are very, very true. I was listening to the hearings in the legislative session last time, and I heard a senator say that that this educational savings accounts for the school districts is a win-win. He said it was a win for the school districts financially, and a win for parents because they don't have to pay childcare costs. But I think that one of the things that was not considered is the unintended consequences to the early childhood community. In my opinion, unless assistance is extended to high quality programs, in the legislation it talks about quality programs, and I'm saying that if you offer assistance to high quality preschool programs, instead of the government just paying for the 4-year-olds to go to preschool in public schools, it could be very detrimental to the child care services in Wyoming, because obviously it's very hard for a private sector business to compete with a service that's paid for by the government. And with that, I'll thank you and answer any questions you may have. And if you should like, I will be happy to share all of my information about the finances that we have and our enrollment and so forth.
Thank you, Mr. Greaser. It sounds like you have extensive knowledge in the area and a pretty good operation going on right now. So thank you. It's great service to the community. Any questions for Mr. Greaser?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clouston has a question.
Go ahead, Representative Clauston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Greaser, and thank you for your testimony and your life's work. I did want to clarify the way the ESA is written is that as long as a child is going to any certified preschool, they qualify for the ESA. So if you have a student that's going to your school, you're qualified, certified by the state superintendent, that money then would go to that family and they could use that money to help pay for care at your facility. So it is not just to public schools, and actually that's not what it was meant for.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony and thank you for being here. Where I'm at again, my question is pretty much for everybody, your staffing issues. And you said it clear, it's like that person's sick, it's hard to find those right people. And then my question to you is, as far as your staffing and your pay for your staffing, are you up to what school teachers are getting? Are you low? Where do you feel at on your pay scales for your staffing, especially your highly qualified teachers and paras or anybody, even a janitor or whatever, bus driver, you heard transportation, those people too.
Go ahead, sir.
Go ahead.
Our highly qualified teachers make about the same dollar amount as the school district teachers as their new hires. However, we do not offer the benefits, and it is also a 12-month job. So why would somebody take that? It's because they went into the field to be with young children, and we offer them that opportunity. Secondly, in Laramie, as I assume in many places, if you drive around town, take you just a few minutes to see lots of "we're hiring" signs. So the prices have been going up and up and up. We go up to hire more people, they go up, we go up. We've gone up about 30% in the last year and a half. And still having struggles. I have empty classrooms because of lack of ability to hire.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ma'am, would you like to state your name and continue on from there?
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Jamie Stein. I'm the Executive Director for Developmental Preschool and Daycare Center here in Laramie. So we partner really closely with Basic Beginnings, and we're fortunate in our community that we have some really great and strong partnerships. I wanted to echo a lot of the things that Mr. Greaser said here today with some of the concerns about, childcare and access and the affordability of it. And losing 4-year-olds from our programs can be really detrimental because it would increase the cost that families would need to pay for their younger kids, because the way our system works, we have less teachers with a 4-year-old than we do with an infant. So it is arguably much more expensive to provide care for an infant than it is for a 4-year-old. So it all kind of subsidizes. So if we move those 4-year-olds out from our private childcare settings, the cost per child for those younger kids is going to increase. So the cost to the families is going to incrementally increase for that, because we still have the same overhead. The cost of our building is still the same. The cost of our utilities is the same. But the cost to care for each child will increase because we have to have more staff to care for those younger children. But ultimately, what I really wanted to talk about and respond to were some of the conversations from this morning. Being the Child Development Center for Albany County, I wanted to address some of those questions and comments that came up earlier about what requirements do we have to follow? We follow DFS requirements. We are DFS licensed facilities. So all of our classroom ratios are designated by Department of Family Services, depending on the age of the child. That's for birth through even 12, because we as well, like Basic Beginnings, we do serve kids up to the age of 12. They designate how many square feet we have to have per child in our facility. It's 50 square feet per child for infants, and it's 35 square feet per child for kids over the age of 1. So that was the first thing, is that we do have, as a licensed facility, something that tells us how many kids we're allowed to have in our classroom with how many teachers that we have in that room. The other part of qualifications for our staff, as a child development center, our special ed staff have to meet minimum requirements that are spelled out under federal IDEA regulations. That means they have to be highly qualified. They have to have a degree in that specialty that they're hired to provide. So if it's an occupational therapist, they have a degree in occupational therapy, and then they're licensed by the state licensing board to provide those services. Our special ed teachers at the early childhood level actually require additional certification that their cohorts in K-12 don't need. In order for a special ed teacher to provide special education to a preschooler, they have to have an early childhood special ed endorsement, which is similar to a master's degree in early childhood special education. Their cohorts, so what we struggle with when we hire a special ed teacher, they don't have that endorsement. They have to enroll in the program, and they have to take 2 years worth of coursework to make that endorsement, which is allowable under federal law. They have up to 3 years to meet that requirement as long as they're continuously enrolled in that program. They could choose to go to the school district without taking additional coursework and get paid more to do it. So it is a really big uphill struggle to hire these qualified staff, but we make it work every day, every year. We have highly qualified staff enrolled in programs if necessary to provide those services. So in essence, we are held to a higher standard, a higher level of requirements than K-12 does. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for being here. And I had a question. Again, I appreciate all that you went through and what's required. And my question is, for those providers that I think we called them community providers before, that you, I think the term pushed was used to to them, from your program to them, so to meet your ratios and things, are they required to meet all those requirements?
Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you, Chairman, Representative Lawley. We cannot dictate what those individual providers require, or, what teachers they have in their programs. All we can do is say, and one thing I left out that I should have said is, in our preschool classrooms within our facility, we do have highly qualified staff teaching our preschool classrooms as well. Typically, what we end up hiring is somebody with a bachelor's degree in education, to which we then require them to actually enroll in a CDA program, which is a Child Development Associates program, to get that early childhood specified learning, so that they have very high knowledge of how to work with those younger children. But to answer your question, in those other community providers, we cannot require them to do so. Oftentimes, that is the option that we have based on the least restrictive environment that the IEP team designated, that is the best place to continue serving that child. We can encourage them, and our staff help them with some curriculum ideas to help them serve the kids that are on IEPs. But we cannot require that they hold, or that they are a highly qualified individual under our current programming in the state.
Thank you. Do you have any concerns about, because of that dynamic, that we could be in a position in Wyoming where we're funding the CDCs and we expect certain things, and we have that. You've described it very well, what you do, and do it well and with well-qualified folks in the right place. But for those who are, as they say, pushed out, I know that's probably not the best term to call it, but they're placed somewhere else because of capacity issues. Do you have any concern that there is a difference in the level of service that those kids receive?
Good.
Thank you, Chairman, Representative Lawley. I think there's always that concern, and that's a conversation that I have been part of. I've been in this role for 11 years, and it is always a concern for us because as the Child Development Center, we're required to provide a free, appropriate public education. And if we can't guarantee that these children that are in these other private providers are receiving an actual education, that is definitely a concern. But at the same time, there's just no way that we can serve every child that's on an IEP in our own facilities either, nor do we want to compete with those other providers. Ideally, we would love to bring those other providers along with us and, elevate the level of education that's available. And I think that there's opportunities for the state to do that within the existing system that's there, but being able to offer some additional education and some additional opportunities for those providers that are there.
Representative Obermuller, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So earlier testimony indicated that everyone has a waiting list. So bringing school districts and everyone else into these, providing these services doesn't impact others because everybody has these major waiting lists. Your testimony seems to indicate that maybe that isn't completely accurate, that you are concerned about losing a certain population in your schools, namely the 4-year-olds.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you, Chairman, Representative Obermuller. My concern with that was kind of piggybacking on what Mr. Greaser commented on with the ESAs, and if that promoted more of the school districts to take on educating all of the 4-year-olds in the communities, that could be detrimental to private providers moving forward, not necessarily that we've lost them at this point. I know in Albany County specifically, the TANF program has been available and has been serving 3- and 4-year-olds in our community. And we work with them. It's another opportunity for us to be able to place children in a highly qualified preschool setting to provide those services to children. So we look at it as a mutual partnership. My concern would be if it went to a universal preschool scenario where every 4-year-old was in a school district preschool setting, that could be very detrimental.
Go ahead, follow
up. Do you have any additional comments on this subject, sir? You're the one who raised that concern, I believe, about the impact on your school.
Go ahead, Mr. Greaser.
Mr. Chairman, right now, our school is not full. If we were able to hire more, we could have more children than we do now, and things are trending better in that way. In Laramie, at least. I think that's partly due to the economy. I do not see the big waiting lists for above 3-year-olds, 3 and above. We have certainly big waiting lists for 0 to 2. Always have. Probably always will. And I think that if the 4-year-olds leave our facility, we may be able to, the increased cost for the 1- and 2-year-olds, for the 0 to 2-year-olds will probably cause us to have less children than more.
Okay. All right, thank you, sir. A follow-up? So I'm interested to hear from both of you. Have either of you participated in the development of this funding model for early childhood? And what are your thoughts about that in terms of its impact on your operations?
Go ahead, sir.
I have not, and
I believe that it would be a benefit to everyone if private people were able to participate in this funding model, as Representative Clauston said, because we offer something that the school district doesn't, which is days for people who work 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, and summers and holidays, and more compatible with what people need for working class schedules.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairman and Representative Obermueller. I actually have been part of the conversation for the early childhood special education funding model. I've been on that committee and part of that conversation through this whole process. I do believe that the way that the funding model has been designed will help not only the special ed, or child development centers, but it will also allow us to help our other local providers. Currently, we receive no separate funding for the regular education piece. So that FAPE, what we talked about, the free appropriate public education, that comes out of our current funding that we already get. We're required by law to pay for it if we have to place a child in a facility that's not ours. So I should have also mentioned that I do oversee Region 8, which is Carbon County. So I have 3 preschool centers over there as well. But we have kiddos in communities that we don't have a preschool in. So for example, Hannah, we have 6 kiddos that we've been providing IEP services to that we place in the only preschool program that's in Hannah. So we pay for that placement. By receiving funding through the funding model that's specific for that regular education piece, it'll be a lot easier for us to help encourage some of those other providers to increase their minimum hiring requirements or expectations for staffing to meet those higher requirements, because we can help them by placing more children in those facilities that they're going to receive funding for. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
We have somebody on Zoom, I understand.
Yes, Superintendent Stoltz from Sheridan 2 is on Zoom.
Oh, let him in, please.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
My name is Scott Stoltz, Superintendent District 2 in Sheridan. Also with me, Rebecca Adsit, Assistant Superintendent for our district as well. We appreciate the opportunity to share with you information regarding the preschool program we have in District 2. And a lot of what we're going to share is similar. I think there's a little bit of some differences. So with that being said, we have just completed our 2nd year of a preschool program. And to back that up just a little bit, essentially what this looked like is approximately 7 years ago, my role was the assistant superintendent that was in charge of elementary education. And in looking at the district screeners that we provide our students in the spring of every year prior to them entering kindergarten, there was certainly some indications that our students were not coming what we considered kindergarten ready. That conversation was held with kindergarten teachers, principals, and determined at that point we needed to look at perhaps doing something different. So as a result, I took a trip to Thermopolis where they were implementing a program that was called a preschool early childhood liaison. And that individual worked closely with daycares, preschools, and along with the school district in providing specific information, specific resources that of course supported what they were doing, but at the same time was aligning their work to what they were expecting in kindergarten, which of course there was great collaboration that occurred because of that. As a result, we then followed up with that institution in mind, starting 5 years ago with an early childhood liaison, which is funded through foundations that we have in Sheridan, and it also works in collaboration with Sheridan College, who also works with our early childhood students that are looking to pursue a degree in early childhood. That individual works very closely and has done so for the last 5 years with preschools, daycares, and most importantly with parents. And it is not in competition with, rather it's done in support of. And as a result of this program, it is not a drop-off program, rather it's an opportunity for our parents to bring their birth to 5-year-olds to a program 2 days a week for approximately an hour to work on specific activities that are to be engaged with those appropriate age levels, knowing full well the plasticity of the brain from 0 to 5 is critical. And also knowing that regardless of your level of education, when we have our own children at home, we don't know a lot about what should we be providing for them at home. So the activities that we're providing our parents don't require a doctorate degree, don't require a high school diploma. They are opportunities for parents to engage with their children in a variety of different activities. And those parents are then able to leave with those activities and work with them in the comforts of their own home. As a result of those conversations, we were then also hearing that in our community, similar to what we have heard testimony of, that there is a shortage of daycares, but more specific to us, preschools. So 3 years ago, I then went to the specific daycares and preschools to say we were looking at also adding a preschool opportunity for our children, for 4-year-olds. And to a institution, they said, we have waiting lists right now. We would certainly encourage that opportunity. So as a result, 2 years ago, then we started a preschool program. That preschool program was funded through ESSER money, which we know has certainly gone away. We are now, it is a tuition-based program. It's an enterprise program, which in this particular case, this enterprise program does not break even. We do, in fact, as far as what does the curriculum look like, I know that was been a question that's been raised in previous testimony. We do follow the Wyoming Early Learning Standards that specifically focus on relationships and interactions, communication, cognition, and physical health. So with that, I will turn it over to Rebecca Adsit, who will speak more specifically about the details of our program.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. Sheridan 2 offers 2 pre-K programs at 2 of our elementaries. Each school has 1 teacher and 2 6-hour paras. We serve a total of 36 students, 18 at each location, 12 full-time and 6 part-time at, again, each elementary. We offer it for the teacher schedule, which is 185 days, so August 20th for next year through June 3rd, again, following that schedule. We open enrollment for our staff first and then our community. We actually leave it open for a week and then we conduct a lottery depending on the number that are interested. We expect an associate's degree in early childhood education or a related field, and a bachelor's degree is preferred. When we look at probably the most exciting piece, maybe just a little bit different than what you've heard today, I'd like to share that our teachers also participate in a pre-K professional learning community where they together create assessments of the standards and then give those assessments. They share the data with one another and then share instructional strategies. In addition, they also attend the kindergarten PLC, so they're aware of those kindergarten standards and the expectations of kindergarten as well.
We would stand for any questions that you may have.
Questions, any questions for Sheridan? Questions? Seeing none, thank you all very much. Appreciate you taking the time. Committee, we're going to take a 10-minute break, necessity, and be back at 20 minutes after.
Excellent. We have a quorum. So we'll call this meeting back to order. Wasn't loud enough. We do. She was standing outside the door. There you go.
Very gavel-like.
Very. All right, before we leave preschool, Mr. Chairman, you had an idea for a bill.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, what I want to do is get a bill drafted. I'll work with the LSO on it. But my thought is that we aren't going to be able to afford in the foreseeable future to have a big expansion in publicly funded preschool programs. I'm persuaded there's a need for them. The thought is to try to leverage what is already being paid for in the private sector. And I think parents want that for their children if they can identify what really is there that's effective. And to be effective, I think that the programming provided needs to prepare for kindergarten readiness. So what I want to do is put a bill together that says if you want to call your operation a preschool, you have to have a curriculum that is aimed at kindergarten readiness, which means we're going to have to define kindergarten readiness. So what I want to do is put a bill together that will say that if you're going to call yourself a preschool, you have to meet that standard. It'll have to have a delayed effective date on that part of it to give the businesses time. But that would give the parents a clear indication of who was legitimate and who wasn't when they claimed to be a preschool. And then it'll have the start of a definition on reading readiness. Get the bill drafted in a hurry, get it out for the interested parties, because I won't get the definition right, I'm sure. I want to use it as a scaffolding for people to propose amendments. So that we can have something at the next meeting we can start to work up. So, Mr. Chairman, if that's all right with the committee, I'd like to proceed on that basis.
It's good with me. We're going to define preschool, kindergarten, and curriculum. So.
Yep.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Chairman Scott, is this for just the preschool providers that receive any state funds? Is it from the? What programs are you trying to target?
Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to target the existing preschool providers, but it's not going to be a requirement for anybody. It's if you want to call yourself a preschool as opposed to just a childcare provider, then you have to do these things so that parents will know which ones are actually providing the preschool services. And we'll have to be a little careful about how we word that. And I'll give you all a first draft within just a few days.
Okay. Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I don't necessarily disagree with the concept that the chairman has. What I would like to see though is potentially LSO coming to us with definitions or some sort of educated synopsis of what these terms mean in other states or what they should say, or there's just a lot of implications for defining these terms without and inserting them in the statutes without necessarily knowing maybe what best practices are. I would feel much more comfortable walking into this discussion with an LSO memo first telling us what's kindergarten readiness, what's pre-K, how does XYZ state define this term, where in our statutes are we going to see that this definition has implications? Because I presume we use the words pre-K no, if we don't use those words, then great. But where in the statute are we going to potentially have consequences for how we define these items?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think that reasonable request to ask the LSO to take a look at how other states define some of these terms. I don't think it's reasonable to ask the LSO to do the definition. I don't think either they or we know that. What I want to do is throw a scaffolding out there and get the State Department, the school districts, the School Board Association, the WEA, all to tell us what does it really need to be, and then we can sort out the recommendations we get and look at the other states. So this is, you got to understand, this is just a first attempt to give us something we can start working on at the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Office, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I think we can certainly do that and have a look at it. I guess the concern I would have in asking the co-chairman, it feels a little bit like a solution looking for a problem where I haven't heard anyone saying that they are seeing confusion or that we don't have high quality education in place for our preschools throughout the state. I think most of them end up either participating in TANF programs or other subsidy programs. And I think to do that, they have to already meet a pretty rigorous series of standards. So I guess I'm not understanding what problem we're solving at this point based on the testimony we heard. To me, the testimony that we heard is, wouldn't it be nice if we had more money so that everybody could afford to have half-day pre-K accessibility one way or another, whether that's through our existing preschools or other programs. But I guess I don't see what we're targeting or addressing through this legislation. So perhaps a little more conversation, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the more money I'm hearing is more public government money, and I don't think, number one, I don't think we could get it. Number two, I don't think we should try to get it. I don't want to expand the government that way. I do think that we'll get much more leverage out of what's there now by having a clear definition of what we're looking for in terms of kindergarten readiness, and one that we can communicate to the parents that these programs are really providing that, rather than the parents having to guess, because I don't think most of us as parents knew what kindergarten readiness really is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my suggestion would be that could we possibly table this suggestion until after we talk about the ESA? Because I know the department is always already doing some work in this area that might tighten up what you're wanting to do and understand, so that we don't end up going off on two different trails on this, because I think there's been some work done based on the bill that passed last session, but I know we're going to hear a little bit about that. So I would feel better knowing a little bit about that to inform how we might approach a bill, an independent bill.
I think that what the chairman's proposing is broad enough that we can incorporate anything that we learn from here on also into it, so.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, what I'm really trying to do, putting together a bill, is a scaffolding that we can amend and that we can solicit amendments to.
Further discussion? Right, then we'll have, you and Tanya and LSO, please get together and work that out.
Yep.
And keep the rest of us in the loop as you're working through it so that we can.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, anything else? Any other bill drafts on early childhood? Then let's go to school of choice, which was at 2:45, almost an hour late. Okay. Please go ahead, Tanya.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Tanya Heydrich, Legislative Service Office. I won't belabor, hopefully we can make up some time here My intent is not to walk through the entire education savings account bill, but more to hit the highlights. Recall that it was basically a replication of the bill that was heard by this committee last year. There were some changes both as a result of the governor's line item veto as well as the conference committee. And included within your meeting packet, you'll note that the 2024 Wyoming Session Laws, Chapter 108, House Bill 166 is present, along with the bill summary and the governor's veto letter. At a high level, this bill creates education savings account program for children ages 4 through graduation or some similar event. It's to be used at a qualified school or qualified educational expenses. Those are listed in the statute. It does include an element for pre-K and non-public elementary and secondary schools. There was a comment about whether the program could be used at private preschools or public preschools. And if you look in the bill draft, or rather the statute 21-902A, Romanet 7, it defines qualified school. And you'll note that it states it means a preschool or non-public primary or secondary school. And because there is no designation before preschool, it would be open to both public and private preschool programs.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Just on that point, I think it's important to emphasize, so clearly statutorily, for the pre-K side of things, this voucher could be used at a public school or a private school, as long as it meets the other parameters that you're going to go through, right? So it doesn't need to be explicitly inclusive of either of those two. The phrasing makes it clear statutorily. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, yes, particularly because the very next section, which talks about primary and secondary, it does specify it's non-public entities. And because there's no specification in the term directly before that, it means that it is open to both private and public.
Great, thank you.
Excellent.
Mr. Chairman.
Good, Senator.
One of the purposes of this bill is to have the opportunity for a court test and a contest over what we really can do with in the K-12 system for private and other non-public schools. This, even with the veto, this bill provides the opportunity for that kind of a court test if somebody contests something, does it not?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, to my knowledge, a challenge to the bill has not been filed, but certainly the issues that were pointed out last year a number of times through LSO memos, still exist, even with the governor's veto, but it's unknown how a court might conclude.
Mr. Chairman, and that's the point. It's unknown how a court might conclude, but they'll have to have a live case where we've actually tried to use some of these monies for a private public school to get a court test, wouldn't we?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, in other states, in some instances, basically upon the effective date of the act, when the act was signed into law, members, parents, or other groups, interested parties have challenged the legislation based on its face through a declaratory judgment action. But I think what you're talking about is an as-applied challenge, which would require establishing facts with a particular family or interested party, but it is possible someone could challenge this legislation facially.
Mr. Chairman, so we could get the court test either way.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, yes. I mean, it would take someone, an interested party, filing a challenge to the legislation, which has not happened to date.
Please continue, Tanya.
Moving on, actually, to your point, Chairman Scott, the governor did veto several provisions. If you recall, there was a conference committee sort of late in the session that identified a tiered system for awarding of the grants, and that can actually be found on pages 3 and 4 of the legislation. And it was a range of $6,000 to a low of $600, and it was based on their federal poverty level anywhere from 150% to 500%. And pursuant to the governor's veto, the only provision and the only award that is effective is $6,000 at the 150% of the federal poverty level. And I would note there's a grammatical issue, so as a result of the line item vetoes, so when the green books are actually printed, it's not going to read quite right, and perhaps we can fix that through the reviser's bill. I would also note that applications can begin January 1st of 2025, and the oversight and administration of the program is charged to the Department of Education, which does include certification of pre-kindergarten programs. And the discussion about pre-kindergarten versus preschool, I think, is an important point. Pre-kindergarten, the only place that it appears Representative Provenza is in this law. It doesn't appear anywhere else. That's a term that we created for purposes of drafting this bill. And I would note, again, there's a certification process for the pre-kindergarten that will be run through the State Department of Education. I'm sure they'll speak to that. There's an appropriation of $20 million for the initial awards for this scholarship. In addition, $400,000 was appropriated for contracting, and $480,000 was appropriated along with 2 positions to the Department of Education to administer this law. And I already spoke to the veto of enacted by the governor, and I would note that letter is also present in your packet. Just checking my notes here to make sure I hit all of the high points. I think that concludes a high-level discussion of the bill draft, subject to any questions.
Questions from the committee? Very good. Thank you, Tanya. All right, can we hear from the department on how you're coming along with it?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members, Dickie Shaner, Department of Education, to talk about the Education Savings Account program progress. We submitted a memo on this, and I will just reiterate some of the highlights. So we're sort of back mapping from the January 1, 2025 deadline of when we'll start accepting applications. So we know we've got to get a lot done prior to that date. And some of the big things we're working on right now. Staffing. We have 2 FTEs authorized July 1. So we've put job descriptions together. We've worked with some national partners to really figure out what functions we need those 2 FTEs to do. One will be more of an academic programmatic person that will work with our accreditation team to do some of the academic requirements in the law. And then the other will be a financial person to work on the reimbursements and the expenses, and with the vendor that we ultimately will get for this. So we should have those jobs posted here in the coming weeks, and then hopefully get someone hired quickly in July for both positions. We're started on our rules. We will be putting rules out that address a lot of the topics in the legislation related to some of the procedures, the applications, the agreements that have to be executed, how the expenditure process will work, looking at the academic assessment data and how we'll collect that, certifying the different providers, et cetera. And then there are some auditing processes as well. Another really large piece of this puzzle is doing an RFP for a vendor. So this program is, we are, I believe, one of 20 states now that has some variation of an ESA program. And there are a number of vendors out there from when this movement, I would say, started, that will come in and help states administer that. And so we hope that we get some interest from some of those players when we put out a request for proposals to have help with administration, particularly having the parents apply, doing the income verification, looking at the potential expenditures. A lot of them will help us set up an online marketplace, which I think is something that we'll be looking at in terms of when the parent that wants to use an ESA will go to an online marketplace that a vendor will help us create that will have all of the different places that they can use their ESA that have already been approved. So that'll be something we hope to get out, I think within the next month, is a request for proposals and see who wants to partner with us. The website and stakeholder engagement, we do have a page on our website now with information, some of just the general timelines, the income requirements. If you remember, after the veto, now it is 150% of the poverty line or less to qualify for the ESA program, which is a $6,000 account that the family will get. So that information is up. We will be updating that as we get more information to share. In addition to that, we're putting together 2 stakeholder groups, one for K-12 and one for pre-K, both of who we think will be the primary users of this program. So looking at the Catholic diocese schools, the home schools, and then for pre-K, we're trying to get everybody to the table as well to look at that. So really trying to put together some systems in place to keep communication going, information out, to inform families that are interested in this program so that everybody's ready to go in January next year. And then lastly, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to point out 2 things. Without having the FTEs right now, we're all kind of just collaboratively working together, and we've received a lot of help. And one entity I want to point out is the Yes Every Kid Foundation is a national organization that supports these types of school choice initiatives, and they've donated an enormous amount of time with expertise on how to start one of these programs, and just very grateful for all the support they've provided us to help us get on the right foot with this work. And second, I want to acknowledge our WDE intern, Sam Alexander, who's here. And he is a Laramie High graduate, and he has chosen to spend a good portion of his summer interning with the WDE and working on this ESA program. So he's been a big help as well. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd just be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for, go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shaner, you mentioned the 2 FTEs, one being academic, one being financial, looking at expenses, vendors. One of the biggest conversations or concerns that I had was the income verification and ensuring that we were able to have the same process that DFS uses, and wasn't sure we had enough FTEs to do that. So I'm curious, is that going to be something that we're going to have to come back and fund? Or do you think that this financial person is going to be able to add that in their description?
Go ahead, Dickie.
Mr. Chairman, through you, Representative Provenza, good question. I think remains to be seen. DFS has been a great partner in helping us already with this, particularly with the pre-K piece, helping us use their data in terms of how many families might qualify for this too. So I'm optimistic that with their help and the full-time employee plus the help of an eventual vendor, that we will be able to figure that out.
Follow up, go ahead.
Separate question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Shaner. On your outside support, you mentioned, yes, Every Kid is a 501c4 nonprofit. 501c4s can work in elections and are political entities. So I'm just curious if what your understanding of that is and how they're using those funds to engage in campaign endorsements.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, Representative Provenza, I wanted to be clear that I should have been more clear in my memo, but it is their foundation that's funding the support, not their political organization.
Okay, further questions? Go ahead, Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the question is, there's a 20 million appropriation. Is there any thinking as to how that's going to split up between the preschool and the K-12 levels?
Go ahead, Dickie.
Mr. Chair, through you, Co-Chair Scott. So we have 20 million over 2 years. And right now, the way we're looking at it is 10 million each year. And of that 10 million, 80% goes to K-12, 20% goes to pre-K. However, the catch is that if there's excess money in the pre-K, it rolls up to the K-12. So what we're going to try to figure out either through the rule process or just administratively is how we time the applications to allow for, eventually there'll have to be a cutoff of the pre-K. And if there's excess, to roll that into the K-12 and still have enough application time to let people on if there's a demand. So that's where we're at in the funding thought process.
Representative Clauston, you have a question? Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Shaner. Two questions. In the governor's letter, the second paragraph, he explained he vetoed most of the tiered level because we're not allowed to give public money except for help of the poor. I know that to qualify for TANF, you have to be at 185% of the poverty level. To qualify for the CHIP program, it's 200%. To qualify for the cancer screenings, it's 250%. Can you think of any other programs where we're giving our state dollars to help in the poor that are in that 200, 250, or 300% level?
Go ahead, Dickie.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you, Representative Clausen, I couldn't add to your list that you just said, but.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is, how does the department currently certify pre-kindergarten or preschools when we're talking about what schools would qualify for the ESA program?
Go ahead, Dickie.
So, Mr. Chair, through you, Representative Clausen, we don't currently certify any of those preschools. That's a DFS process. But as we talked about earlier, part of this legislation will require that any pre-K that takes an ESA payment will have to prepare, not sure the exact language, but prepare kids for kindergarten. Excuse me. So we're going to have to undertake a process in terms of what we do at WDE to meet that requirement of making sure that whatever pre-K program it is that takes this money has in place the systems necessary to prepare a child for kindergarten. But that's yet to be done.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott, please.
In response to the question, in the Medicaid program, in the developmental disabilities area, I think there is no test because you get a severely disabled individual, and the same would apply for being admitted to the Life Resources Center up in Lander. Only the very wealthiest could afford that. So we don't have a income limitation on that because of that. So that is your example where we've gone over the other limits that we've seen elsewhere.
Senator Steinmetz has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And following up with Representative Clausen's question, should we tweak this legislation in the next session? Because we had clearly had a different idea of what we were trying to do with this bill than maybe the governor's veto reflects. And so the legislature may want to revisit some of the tiered system. Would you be able to respond to that quickly enough, because of your application process, I think starts January 1, 2025. How would that affect your process?
Go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Senator Steinmetz, a couple thoughts come to mind. One, we certainly aren't in a position to say where a court would draw the line on terms of support for the poor, whether it's 150% of the poverty line or 300%. But I can say that Superintendent Degenfelder has supported the concept of this being as universally available as possible, right? So I think she would be in support of expanding access to it. In terms of the timelines that a legislative change would have, that's a good question, because we'd start accepting applications in January, and if a law, say, became effective upon signature, I suppose we would have to put out communications and tell people, hey, you're now eligible if you're this % of poverty line and there's this much more money available, get your applications in. So I think we would just have to, we'd have to put out information and educate people, and also probably look at adjusting different application timelines to allow for more people.
Further questions for Dickie? Thank you. Oh, Representative Lawley, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vicki, is it possible we could look at legislative changes, though, that were effective in 2026, so they would not affect the current, what you're doing currently, but would be in effect for the second year of the program that would expand it?
Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman,
Dickie.
through you, Representative Lawley, I'm sure, I believe so.
Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss, please go ahead.
One other aspect of that is you'll definitely get a lot of insight, although it would grow over time with marketing and understanding. But if it is limited to the 150%, you'll see the demand on the 150% on both sides of the ESA legislation. That would probably be useful information then when you're contemplating, which we didn't have previously, what those other levels might look like and how much additional funds would be necessary if you did want to comprehensively expand it. So I agree with Representative Lawley that it makes good sense to probably not change it for the upcoming year, but potentially considering it for the following.
Further questions? Not appearing. Thank you. Okay. Committee, do you have questions for the governor's office on the bill? Anybody have a question? If nobody has a question, then we won't call them up. None? All right. Does anybody have anything else on the session laws of Chapter 108, Education Savings Account? If not, we're going to move on to charter schools. We could do public comment if it's quick.
Are we sure that the end is the public?
It's in public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I heard that right. I don't know that I actually should be allowed in public. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I just wanted to express gratitude for all of
Who are
your
you?
work. Oh, Mr. Chairman, sorry. Yeah, it's part of the process. I'm new to this. My name is Tyler Lindholm. I'm the State Director for Americans for Prosperity here in the state of Wyoming. And I did want to express gratitude to the committee for your work during the legislative session and past interim, where you put a considerable amount of work in a pretty solid piece of legislation. I was disheartened to hear that the governor's office was not going to testify as to essentially dismantling a part of what I thought was really great legislation. But hopefully, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I hope that you'll move forward with legislation this year and rework the process to hopefully maybe even put it back, even back to SNAP levels or something along those lines, that you'll be easily able to point at for the rest of the legislature as what's a make sense level for what is the poor. I think the message that was sent by the legislature with the passage of that legislation is that school choice and parents' decisions matter. And I think the message sent from the governor's office was somewhere along the lines that you're not necessarily poor enough. And that's a rough message. And so us at Americans for Prosperity, we're kind of winged by that, but I think the legislature can help correct that, and maybe with some time and over the next several months, find a piece of legislation that actually reworks that process and does a better job of explaining to not only the people of Wyoming, but to the executive also.
Questions for Mr. Lindholm? Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so now we're gonna move on to charter schools, and Dickie, you're back up on the hot seat. And anybody else you would like to bring along with you. You don't have to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dickie Shaner, Department of Education. Speaking about the state authorized charter school process, and as everyone's aware, last year there was a board created, and the authority over state authorized charter schools transitioned from the State Loan and Investment Board to this new board, which we are calling WCSAB for short, the Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board. And so that board was comprised, and the first order of business was transferring the authority and the applications and the charter contracts from the SLIB to the WCSAB. And that was done successfully. And then the board quickly shifted into working on the 3 schools that had been authorized. And 2 of those opened this school year, just completed their first school year. The third that was authorized was in Cheyenne, but due to a facility issue, they weren't able to open. However, I do believe they will be opening this fall. So starting this fall, we'll have 3 state authorized charter schools open, and then 2 will be in their second year of being open. And then as well, there was a budget footnote this session that expanded on the moratorium of the 3 state authorized charter schools and potentially allows 1 more state authorized charter school in Western Wyoming. And so that application deadline will open in July. So there will be potentially applications from groups in Western Wyoming that want to become the 4th state authorized charter school. Some of the things that the board works on, in addition to helping these schools get open and navigate all of the different things they have to do as a school, is working on their own policies, processes, documents. They went out for a request for proposals this year to procure a national expert to help them develop their best practices around authorizing schools. They ended up executing a contract with the National Association of Charter School Authorizing Boards. They've done 1 session with the board and will continue for the next year, training the board on different things they need to do as a state authorizer. And I would just close that by saying, Mr. Chair, we were really pleased to finish year 1 for both the 2 schools that opened. There was a lot of just day-to-day discussions on all the different things that schools need to do and how we can help, because this is a program that hasn't existed before, and there were a lot of questions that we had to work through. But I just want to compliment the board and our team that's been working on this, as well as the leaders of the charter schools that have really been just collaborative, and also the school districts where the state authorized charter schools reside. So Platte County and Natrona County, those school district leaders as well, just everybody coming to the table and trying to problem solve, because there were a lot of questions that we had to work through over the past year. So with that, happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Questions for Dickie on charter schools? Or for the department? Go ahead, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering if you feel like you're adequately staffed and funded to do this work, and how all of that's working out.
Go ahead, Dickie.
Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Steinmetz, I believe at this point that the superintendent thinks that the staffing is sufficient. We have 1 full-time staff person plus another part-time administrative person that helps with different logistics and meeting minutes and things. And the board had funding to procure this national expert to come in and train as well, with funding from the legislature without taking from the charter schools. So I'm optimistic that with the training they're undertaking, with the growth we've seen and learning that's occurred, that we're in a good place for this charter board and their duties ahead, which will include continuing to support the new Cheyenne charter school that opens, as well as potentially looking at applications for a 4th charter school.
Representative Brown, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dickie, you kind of perfectly segued into my question for the potential fourth. Has the department heard or even had expressed interest? We had another bill come through this past session. One of the things that, you know, the collective wisdom of these two bodies said is, hey, look, we need to kind of get an idea of what we're looking at for spending before we just open the floodgates on this. But it does seem that there's a growing interest in charter schools. What has the department seen for interest across the state besides just the one that we're aware of on the west side of the state?
Go ahead, Dickie.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you, Representative Brown, as recently, I would say in the last couple months, I've heard of potentially 3 that might apply for the Western Wyoming slot. I haven't heard of others that were potentially maybe in Eastern Wyoming and not able to apply. But I think what we've seen from this process is once you kind of put the policy landscape in place to allow for more schools, you'll probably get more interest.
So of course, that begs the question, what do they cost?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, pretty similar funding to what any school would cost under the funding model. Now the facilities issues works a little different depending on if they have a private facility and they're getting lease payments or whether, you know, that's a little bit more of a complicated scenario. But as far as their ADM, they're getting funded like a school district or a school in a school district.
Okay. Further questions for Dickie, charter schools? All right. Mr. Masters, do you have anything you'd like to add to the charter school discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's John Masters. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and with the Education Committee. We are, as indicated, I am the chairman of the Charter Authorizing Board, and we're still in our first year. We started operations August 3rd. At the same time the SLIB was meeting, we met simultaneously.
Pull the mic a little closer to you.
Okay, speak up, in other words. And we've had an interesting go-around, I guess you could say, because a lot of the things that you might expect would be done automatically were not done automatically, or were done without our involvement. Part of the suggestion, for example, is that we are under contract with the national consultant. We ourselves are not under contract. That's a contract with the department. We expressed our interest in November that we wanted to hire a consultant. We did not have a voice in the preparation of the RFP. We did have a voice in the review of the RFP, and we suggested our preference in January. The contract itself came about I think in April. So you can see there's been a considerable delay along the way of getting us up and running. And that has caused no little consternation on my part and some of the other members. So there have been questions raised about the staffing. We have an appropriation of $140,000. When we take out the payment for the liaison of roughly $125,000 or $124,000 for salary and benefits, we have an operational budget for each of the next 2 years of about $16,000 to conduct our meetings, travel, and any program expenses that we might incur. That being said, the question came up, we have the authority to ask for an administrative fee under the law of up to 3% of the funds going to the charter schools. But the charter schools themselves are in their early startup under considerable strain. And so there was pushback, and I think justifiable pushback on part of the board to want to ask for our portion of that potential assessment. As a result, when these two things came together, we suggested to the department that we thought we needed an executive director. And yet, while the board supported the concept of an executive director, the board was not willing to look for a way to fund that position. And consequently, the governor's office came forward and said they would look for and provide us means to fund that for a period of time. And they have worked diligently towards that end without requiring any further contribution from the existing charter schools. I would point out, and I provided, I think, in your materials, a handout that was prepared by Leslie Zimmerscheid of the department that demonstrates where the funds come to the charter schools and where charter schools do not participate in funds. For example, they are reimbursed in arrears for certain expenditures, which means they have to fund the first year, generally speaking. And that's a substantial burden for them. And in some instances, they receive no funding at all. For example, a central office type environment. That central office environment, you could say, is being provided in the case of the two existing functioning charter schools by Natrona County or Platte County. But there's really a separateness when you have a state authorized charter where they really are not providing and I don't think anybody intended that they provide services to the state authorized charters. So they have been somewhat of a disadvantage to the extent they needed to provide those services. They've been providing them with funds that came through their block grant. And so I pointed out by highlighting a few areas on Ms. Zimmerscheid's handout to me, which we received, I believe it was in April, might have been March. Where I thought the legislature might want to take a look at and consider should there be modification so that the schools, the charter schools, could participate in some of those funds. The easiest one that I found was the personnel, the non-personnel funds of $451.70, I believe, that are paid to the district for central office administration on a per capita basis or ADM basis. Seems to me that those could easily pass through and should. I don't know whether they are or not because we don't have that information. But it's those types of things which I think the legislature might want to look at because the funding model obviously came into existence before this issue arose, and yet it's having an impact. Transportation, Title I, those types of expenditures which are paid in arrears, plus some in the nature of the central office, which are not being necessarily directed to the charter schools, but are instead going to the school district where the charter school happens to reside. So for those reasons, it's been suggested by others, and I think it's probably worth considering. What is the future enrollment? And the other handout, I provided an estimate based on 40 states that currently there are about 8% of the students in the United States in those 40 states that are in public charter schools. In other words, not in public non-charter schools. Well, if we were at 8%, and you can use any number you want because there would be both the enrolled public students as well as students that might come into the system from either private schools or home schools. But you could easily get to 7,000 students being in charter schools within a reasonable passage of time, but for the moratorium. And if we had even half of that, say 3,500 or 4,000, the cost of operating this board and the duties that we have under this board could be borne by a much larger student population and spread out. And I don't think it would have to be anywhere near 3%, but right now, we feel like we're not even able to ask for the 3% without a substantial imposition on these startups. So those issues, I think, are worthy of consideration by this board or this committee. And I don't really have any great suggestions about how you pre-fund busing or how you might, want to assist charter schools when they're startups. The history has been, however, that they rely on grants and support from donors and wealthy people who are willing to kind of underwrite the startup costs. And while that's commendable, it's not always available. And I don't want to see a situation arise where there is a need for a charter school, but no available funding to overcome those startup costs. We've got an example, as you all know, of a very small charter school. I think they're doing a great job, but they really need transportation. And right now, to buy a bus, you need to put in your order about a year in advance. Then you get a bus that shows up, and presumably it's going to be what you need, and you're going to pay for it. And then eventually you're going to get reimbursed by the state. So you might have a 2-year lag time before you see $1 of revenue for that bus. And that's a very difficult thing, especially in the rural communities that we have throughout Wyoming. So with that being said, I appreciate the offer of the governor's office to assist us in getting an executive director. I think it'll make things work much more smoothly. It'll keep my board better informed, and will act more like a board rather than an operating agency. And I appreciate the future of charter schools that I think this state will benefit from. And but let me say this. We've spoken primarily about financial matters. To me, financial matters are of secondary importance. The primary importance is the quality of the education. We have yet to start monitoring those quality of education issues that we would like to see, so that we make sure that a child in a charter school environment being paid for with state funds is receiving what he or she can expect to receive in any state, as you know, education institution, the FAP, the free and appropriate public education. So I hope, my hope is in the immediate future, we'll start looking at questions and start gathering the data concerning the quality of the education to make sure that these funds are properly expended. So I had a bunch of prepared remarks, but those were the highlights. And so I would certainly stand for any questions anyone has.
Questions for Mr. Masters? Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Masters, thanks for being here. Appreciate you taking the time out, and especially I'm sure you got other things to do besides sitting in an education meeting all day. I wanted to touch on something you said. You kind of piqued my ears. I'm listening at all times, but something that you said really kind of concerned me. And I want to know what maybe your position as the board chairman versus what the rest of the board might feel like. You said, I don't want to be in a position where we are in need of a charter school, but there isn't funding. Can you provide me with a definition of what a need for a charter school is, as opposed to the wish of a community for a charter school?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Masters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you, Mr. Brown. I guess the need, I think, would be developed locally. In other words, the community has to back a charter school. This charter school will not succeed without a certain number of students participating. And so whatever the community decided was the reason they needed a charter school, that should also, I mean, that's obviously the first barrier that needs to be surmounted. But if the second barrier is finances and they are not able to overcome those startup costs, the need will exist and the inability to, and I really couldn't tell you what a need would be in any particular community, but I think they bear it. Thank you.
Further questions? Go ahead, I'm sorry, Senator Rothfuss first.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Masters, I think we would benefit from maybe getting a write-up in our next meeting of kind of what those budget needs are and what some of the problems that you identified to us today are that we might be able to tackle. I mean, we've got some bureaucratic problems about who has what responsibility that we probably should be ironing out so that things are running smoothly. And you certainly make good points. These are points that we've discussed over the last few years, but now that they're coming into reality, they become a lot more poignant, where we know with transportation, for example, it's reimbursement, and we have other circumstances where we might get a few years behind. So if you can present to us an understanding of what these shortfalls are, both from your perspective as well as from the district's perspective, those are two different budget concepts, then maybe we can start looking at tackling that. And then, Mr. Chairman, the next ask would be on that bureaucratic side where, you know, it sounds like maybe we did structure things incorrectly with the RFP and who is responsible for that perhaps, and the board should have been involved more intrinsically. Are there other issues that maybe we can address through legislation in this cycle to tackle maybe bureaucratic mismatches, things that we should be looking for there?
Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Rothfuss, I think a lot of this is the growing pains that you see. I'm not sure that there needs to be a legislative solution other than, I think, I wasn't involved when the statute was being discussed at the 2 years ago, I guess it was. But it's pretty clear from reading it that there was an intention that we be an independent board, that we operate with the Department of Education, not part of the Department of Education, nor part of the governor's office, nor part of the university or any other institution. And to do that, I think requires that we have somebody who is available at all times to interact with those other agencies, whether it's the University of Wyoming, Department of Ed, the charter schools themselves. We have a duty of monitoring the charter schools. What I fear is that we would get down the road, because monitoring of the charter schools is our responsibility and we were unable to perform it, we find out that upon renewal, this charter school was failing and was failing for a couple of years. And quite honestly, we just didn't know about it because we didn't have the resources, or we didn't attend to our business. And that concerns me because I don't want these charter schools to fail. I want them to succeed.
Go ahead, follow up.
So tell me a little bit about the budget process that you went through in this last budget. I don't recall you having your own isolated section.
We don't.
So do you have a budget entity, or are you wholly within WDE's budget without having a special section?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Rothfuss. As I understand it, and quite honestly, it's been a little bit like pulling teeth to get this information. There was a $280,000 appropriation with the original bill. To my way of thinking, that got us through the period of time when we did not make an assessment. And I appreciate that. We did not spend all of that $280,000 and probably will be reverting somewhere in the $60,000 to $80,000 of those funds. Now we're entering in a new biennium where, as I understand it, we have a total of $280,000 for 2 years, which is $140,000 a year. The staffing people that we pay for at the WDE, that's about $124,500, which leaves us $15,000 or $16,000 to operate for each of the next 2 years. That's not paying for any executive director or any outside consultants or anything else. That's essentially covering our meeting costs. And we have a Zoom connection and a few incidentals of that sort. So yes, we could put together a budget. We were not invited, nor did we participate in the budget development for either of those two biennial periods.
Mr. Chairman, so the thought here is probably consideration of recommending to Joint Appropriations Committee that they create a budget unit for the board if that's the appropriate decision. I'm not saying it is right now, but that's something that we probably need to consider, and that would be the appropriate mechanism if it is justified that we would want to create a budget unit for the board, which I think your original vision was correct, Mr. Masters, that the intent was to have it working with the department, but not necessarily a part of the department. And that might be the mechanism for doing that. And at that point, having FTEs assigned to it would then be appropriate. Working with WDE would be appropriate, and having the internal funding to run the system would be the right way. And Mr. Chairman, I would say, if we're going to do this, we owe it to the students that are participating in the school that it be done right for those students. And we don't want what Mr. Masters was talking about, where we have insufficient oversight to ensure a quality charter school that's one of the state authorized charter schools, because they they don't have any employees, they don't have anybody who's capable of doing the work. Everybody who's there is on volunteer time, and we know how challenging that is. So perhaps that's something else to look into for next time, and then have that conversation. And it might then warrant a letter to Joint Appropriations Committee to make that request for a budget unit.
Senator Steinmetz, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on that, so I was just unclear as to, you said the governor was going to help you out with an executive director. I didn't see that in last year's budget requests. How does he intend to do that? Is that going to come as an exception request, or does he have some other mechanism he will utilize?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Senator Steinmetz, I don't know. The governor's office has determined that they feel it's very, very important that we have the necessary staffing in order for these charters to succeed. I'm not quite sure how that's going to come about, or maybe Ms. Brandt can illuminate us a little bit further, but I don't want to speak for the governor. Thank you.
Okay,
But I'll let Ms. Brandt do that.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Steinmetz. So the governor is taking a frozen position from the Department of Corrections and is going to use that position for this executive director position.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, it looks like Matt Wilmarth has something maybe he wants to share with.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the governor has initiated a B11 process, and so he has a 10-day period that he has to notify the Joint Appropriations Committee. He's done that. And just through our observations to the Joint Appropriations Committee and the Management Council, we did inform them that the legislature, as part of the creation of the Charter School Board, did authorize a new position to the Department of Education, which is similar to what they have done with the State Board of Education, where there is a position authorized for the State Board of Education. And Mr. Masters is right, it's $280,000. What is being done with that one position? I don't know if it's filled or not. Maybe Mr. Shaner can speak to that, but the State Board of Education only has one position, just like the charter school has one position. It is not a separate budget unit, but I'm sure the Department of Education could split it out like that going forward.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, to that position is filled and has been filled. So we do have a person dedicated full-time to helping the administration of the board, as well as providing assistance to the 3 schools. And then we have an administrative support person as well that helps with the administration of the meetings. So 1 full-time and 1 part-time WDE employee for the state charter board, plus all of the staff that pitches in and helps with various levels of expertise on federal programs, special education, et cetera.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, so the B11 is an additional position on top of what has already been authorized by the legislature. I just want to make sure that that's clear, that and one also unique thing about the B11, and I don't know that it's been taken notice, is that the governor is taking excess revenue collected from the foundation program account and authorizing $140,000 of that, or whatever it turns out to be, for the purposes of this position. So he's actually appropriating excess revenues collected by the foundation program. And he's only taken a position, but not the dollars from the general fund, but he's authorizing additional foundation program dollars to do this. And the B11 hasn't been signed yet, but that's a little bit unique in how this is being executed.
Rothfuss got you beat. Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the position that's been filled currently, it sounds like they're not reporting to the board, they're internal within WDE. And I guess I lost in the prior discussion what we were really intending for that position to do. So maybe it's worth hearing a little bit about that position's role and kind of org chart characterization of how it's operating relative to the board.
Go ahead, Dick. You can
Yeah,
Andrew
sure. Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Rothfuss, that position has been instructed to be at the beck and call of the board and probably talks to the chair or board member every day. In addition to being available at all times to help the authorized charter schools, and has a daily dialogue and connection with the leaders of those schools, connecting them with a lot of our experts that work with school districts on the various federal programs and transportation and those things. So yes, she's available and works with the board every day.
You have a follow-up?
Yeah. But on the org chart, she doesn't report to the board. She works with the board, as I'm understanding. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Rothfuss, yes, she's in the WDE org chart.
Okay, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's similar in nature, but I am curious. I want to make sure I remember correctly. We had some discussions about who the LEA ultimately is with this charter school authorizing board. And I'm pretty sure we landed back on that the board itself is actually the LEA, not the WDE. Can you describe a little bit about what, if I'm correct, first of all, on that, but secondarily, what information you can provide to us to kind of give us an understanding of where you guys are at in the process of understanding your role as an LEA and kind of where we're at in that portion? I would appreciate it.
Go ahead, Mr. Masters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Brown. At my request, as early as August of last year, I said, what does it mean to be an LEA? The term local education agency appears in the Wyoming statutes in this act and in the military compact act for children of military families. So it's not well-defined in Wyoming statute. It is well-defined in federal law. And finally, I believe it was at our May 9th meeting, we received a summary of what it means to be an LEA, about 65 lines on an Excel spreadsheet of what the duties and the programs were. That actually it was the meeting 2 weeks later. But at any rate, setting forth what this looks like to be an LEA, and it's comprehensive and substantial. And it's not something we've been doing. The department may have been doing it, and that's great, but we haven't had any appreciable involvement in the performance of those duties. We learned in May that when the legislation transferring the title of LEA to the district, to the charter schools was vetoed and not overridden, that at least some funds that were otherwise going to flow to charter schools were no longer available to those charter schools. I don't know exactly what that means, but what it meant to me on a kind of a guttural level was, if I'd known about it, I would have called a special board meeting and done what it takes to be the LEA for that purpose of making the application. That opportunity was not presented to us, and I don't know why, and I'm not sure it would have helped even at that time. But it's those types of rough areas which have a very practical and dramatic effect on the charter schools, and which I should think at least, hope to avoid in the future. Thank you.
Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the transparency with that. And the reason I'm asking this question is just for exactly that reason. Number one, we all are, I don't want to say it's the blind leading the blind, but this is new charted territory for us, right? We at least have a compass and we at least have an idea of where we're sailing, but they're choppy waters. So can you definitively tell this committee that you guys feel more confident as you're starting to move forward as an LEA and your responsibility as the LEA now?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, at this point, I do not feel more confident because the existing system has not changed. If we are successful in obtaining an executive director who will be hands-on and feet on the ground and be in contact with the schools and work with the department, I will feel a lot more confident that these types of things do not recur.
There's Steinmetz, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and back to the B11. So that is highly unusual. I mean, I've seen them B11 money and things around before, but to create a brand new position and be level the funds, that's something the legislature usually authorizes through the appropriations process. So this is highly unusual, and the fact that we've had no discussion on it, it may be well needed and justified, but we have a legislative process that we follow. And so I guess, do you have more rationale on how this is even a legal action?
Michelle, go ahead, please.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Simons, as far as the legal portion of it, I'm confident that the governor does have this authority. I hear what you're saying, that it is very unprecedented. Because of what you're hearing, and I just take a step back 3 years ago when this legislative body changed the statute to have an independent authorizing board. I think the intent was truly for them to be independent. And we've transferred from the State Land Investment Board to a charter authorizing board. And then there was legislation to transfer it to the schools all within 3 years. There, as you just heard, could have been a lot broader implications of the technical, I think, well-intended amendment they were trying to propose, but it wasn't well understood. We didn't even have a definition yet and responsibilities for what an LEA is. In addition to that, as the authorizer of these schools, they have oversight. An entire year has passed, and I don't think that there's been any oversight or monitoring or support from the board for these schools. I appreciate the department and some of the work that they've done, but we're not there and we're entering another school year. And so if we are going to have these schools and have an independent board, it is absolutely essential that they have the resources and support to operate and to make sure that these charters are successful. And the governor was very concerned from that aspect. And in light of his veto and understanding that the responsibilities of the LEA are going back to that board and they have a lot of work to do and it wasn't working, we didn't have a lot of options. And so this is where we've landed for now, hoping that we can work with all of you to think of a longer term fix.
May I respond as well, Your Honor?
Certainly, go ahead.
Your Honor. Chairman and Senator Steinmetz. August 3rd, I proposed after, for some reason, I was elected chair, that we start working on a JCQ for our position. What I found out very soon after that is that the position had already been filled, that the $140,000 or whatever we thought we had related to a position was already in existence and had been, we didn't have an executive director, we had a $125,000 liaison. In my view, at least, reading the statute, I thought the liaison was going to be the person who would work between us as the board, our person, and the resources of the WDE. I found out that wasn't the case. That was a decision made without the board's involvement. So I think to the extent that there was an inadequacy of funding, it really may have been because we hired a liaison that instead of being a 3-hour-a-week person was a 40-hour-a-week person. And that hasn't worked very well for us because that person is resident in the department. I hope that helps the explanation. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Simons, I should have added that the governor was hoping that the funds that would be utilized for this position would come from the 3% that's provided within the statute to the board to hire them. However, after the testimony from the charters in that it's late in the year, they've already prepared their budgets, the board passed the position without the funding. And so this was an answer to, without that funding, it would be impossible for the position to be established.
Go ahead, Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would it be possible to get a job description of this position that you're talking about from the governor's office and Dickie, the job description from the department to help us parse out, is there duplication of effort? And is it just some other types of conversations that need to happen rather than a dueling out of positions? I'd just like to have a copy of the job description for each of them.
Mr. Chair, through you, Representative Lawley, we
ahead.
can certainly provide that.
So I'm just gonna say that I think in order to have successful schools and the successful students and that we provide some oversight, that we're gonna have this one extra position added in. It may not be the best form of trying to make government work, but if we don't do it, then we're gonna stub our toe for another year, so. I'm gonna,
Ready to move on to a different subject.
you ready to go on to a different subject? Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I wanted to just ask the direct question, why wouldn't we move the position from WDE to report under the board? We might not have all the answers to that right now, but I guess I want to know why we didn't do that in the first place and why we wouldn't do that now as the solution.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Rothfuss, can't speak to ultimately what the legislature determined, but from our perspective, there are two ways to do a state charter authorizer in terms of this LEA designation. 17 out of the 20 states that have a state charter authorizer have the schools themselves be the LEA, which is what was proposed in that legislation. And we were all, a little bit taken aback when it was vetoed. So now we have a situation where the state charter authorizer is the LEA. And our opinion is that having the SEA, the State Department of Education, working every day to support that state charter board LEA is the most effective use of resources for the board and for the charter schools. To have everybody working that closely and that closely connected is necessary, just like it is for any other LEA in the state, to have that tight connection between all the resources available. Because at this point, there's an LEA at the state, but it doesn't have the resources of a local school district. It's a board, so it needs all those resources of the Department of Education to provide this expertise that it needs to do its work. So that, to me, is the philosophy behind having the Department of Ed so tightly connected to the work of the charter board as it stands right now.
Yeah. Oh, sure. How would that break down if it was a direct report to the board tasked with still working with the department, which seems like it solves the concerns that we heard, but I guess I don't see any new concerns that would be taken on that way. And effectively, at that point, we would already have the FTE in place and we would have the funds available.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator, I mean, I think you could flip the coin either way, vice versa. There may not be a problem right now as it exists. There may be more problems. There may create a disconnect if that person is isolated out of the department. And so I think it could work either way. But we're of the opinion that we have the best case scenario is to have the schools be their own LEA. But if we're going to be in the situation we're in right now, having this strong partnership with the WDE, staffing the board, provides the necessary resources.
Okay, I think we beat this horse long enough. Let us move into public comment and
Chairman.
go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
One final item for question. The concern that you raised about the assessment of the quality of the education. First to comment, if you get a real failure, you find out in a hurry because the parents will pull the kids out and send them back to regular schools. I saw that happen in the choice system we had in Natrona County. We had an outfit that talked a good game and couldn't follow through, and that solved itself in a hurry. The more concern that I want to ask you about is how do we get a regular comparison of quality between the charter school and the school district and the rest of the school districts, make sure we're getting top performance there. And my question is, how can we use the existing state YTOP assessment test to provide that? And that's something, be happy to get an answer now, but it's also something, be happy if you want to think about it and get an answer to us.
Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman.
Mr. Masters.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman Scott. Yes, the YTOP will certainly provide information, and the students in charter schools are required to participate in the Wyoming assessment process, the Accountability Act. So that will be certainly part of it. I think there probably are other measures of quality beyond simply that, but we have not yet developed any such measures. Certainly, the assessment is a great starting point, though. ACT may be another one as the students get to that age. Yeah.
Okay, anybody else? We're gonna move on to public comment. We have public comment on charter schools. Would anybody like to comment publicly? Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Carrie Klein. I'm with the Wyoming Public Charter School Association. So good afternoon. I'll be very brief. Just wanted to offer a couple of comments. First of all, we thank you for the conversation. As always, we support continued conversations on how we can improve the policy environment so that these charter schools can thrive and serve the students that are at their schools. Just wanted to, I guess, also express our interest in looking at pieces of the foundational funding model, the school foundation model that charter schools are currently not getting. Mr. Masters referred to the central admin piece, so I think that's a conversation that we'd like to see happen. Also, we'd like to continue the dialogue about measured growth and how we continue to support the work of the board through some additional charter schools in the next coming years in a way that's measured and reasonable for the state of Wyoming. You know, he mentioned that there's been 8% growth, 8% of students in a lot of these other states are in charter schools, and please remember that was probably after 35 years. So the fact that Wyoming could have growth in a measured way is something that we're excited about and would like to see that happen through quality policy. The LEA piece, I think we just wanted to reiterate that charter schools are responsible for those duties when they are getting those title funds, and the most direct line of accountability for that is to have the school itself be the LEA. So again, we would love to continue that conversation, maybe revisit that if it's appropriate in the next session or two. So happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Ms. Klein? Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on public charter schools? If there's anybody else, just come up here and take a seat, please. Please state your name and
Good
who you
afternoon,
represent.
Chairman Northrop, Matt Flett, Chief Financial Officer in Natrona County School District Number 1. Committee members, good afternoon. We heard from WDE, we heard from the State Authorizing Charter Board, and then also the Charter Association. So let's put a fourth leg on this stool and hear from one of the school districts that has one of these charters within its boundaries and how it's went for us the past year. We really kind of want to fill the committee in on that. And this is, we're not for the charter schools, we're not against charter schools. This is going to be very neutral, just fact-based, what we've seen the past year. One item on the funding model came up about the central funding. 100%, we do get that. That's just part of the model. That's part of how the original statutes were written. We would gladly give that up if we can figure out a way where we don't have to flow foundation entitlement money to the charter schools. So as we work through this, like that is one of our biggest interests, is we 100% support the legislative intent of these are their standalone schools. And we're trying to do our best to partner and get there. And that's kind of one of our biggest things is we still have to flow entitlement money through to the charter schools. And as Mr. Shaner said, we have two flavors of charter schools now, and I don't want to belabor this. We have local school board authorized ones, very clear in statute, who's the LEA, what the resources are, where they need to go, and everyone's roles are defined. Now we have the state authorized charter schools, and based on this testimony you've heard the last 45 minutes, it's still a little gray and something we continue to work through. So with that set at the table, our state authorized charter school is strictly within the geographic boundaries of Natrona County School District, the one in Mills. It is not a component unit of our district, and I think we're all well aware of that, but we really want to set the stage of we're trying to be good neighbors because we respect this legislative body so much that I think we'd be well within our statutory boundaries that when the Department of Education sends us entitlement money to flow through, that we could turn around and send it back to the department and say, it's not our school, it's not our problem. And we wouldn't do that because of the legislative intent and the respect we have for this body. And then ultimately, there's students within the boundaries of our district. It would just, all it would do is harm the students. So really nobody wins if we would take that course. So let's get into a few other operational items that we saw this past year. I really commend this legislative committee. Back in August, if we remember, we were down in Cheyenne and we talked about that school within a school functionality with an administrative rule. We've worked hard with the Department of Education and we heard your intent of, the intent wasn't if a student goes from the public district to a state authorized charter, that they drop off a 3-year averaging. WDE has confirmed through the rule process that we can get that changed and circumvent that. And we 100% support and we 100% appreciate your support on that, especially since at the end of calendar year 2023, Natrona County has had 9 straight years of a decline in birth rate. So right now, that 3-year averaging helps us out a lot. And we really appreciate it. As we continue to right size the district, that 3-year averaging really helps, especially with that interaction between the district and that state authorized charter. So thank you on that. Secondly is the foundation flow through. It's really a great process. I know it didn't make it into statute. There was interest in codifying the payment schedule between the school district and the charter. Here's how it works in a Natrona County School District. And it's worked well. We partner and we communicate with the state authorized charter on this. WDE sends us a report every month in the months we receive entitlement, saying, all right, Natrona County School District, you get $10 million, but your charter school receives $175,000. So we get the report, the money gets put into our bank account on Thursday, let's say. We do accounts payable weekly in our district. So we'll do an AP list on Friday, send it to our board of trustees. They have until Tuesday at noon to object any payments. If they don't, we release the payment. So we ACH that money just for the sake of speed, right? We're not going to mail them a check. So we get the money on, let's say, a Thursday, they get it on a Wednesday. So, I mean, there still is a little week lag there, but it goes back to my point of the charter school isn't a component unit of our district. They are literally, we treat it as we are paying a separate entity. So in full transparency, we run that through our custodial fund because it's not our money. And we want our board members and the taxpayers in the Natrona County School District to see what we're doing with that. So it's a very palms up process. I think the if we would have codified that, I think it would have kind of done more harm than good on our part, because I don't think we could have accommodated that schedule anyways. So from our point of view, we're glad it wasn't codified and they're happy with the process. We're happy with it. We're continuing to move on. We've worked hard with the Department of Education, as stated earlier. There is a lot of federal definition around a local education agency. And we believe if the state authorized charter applies for federal funding, that will go directly to them and not have to be flowed through the local school district. So we believe that's a win as well. SPED reimbursement, as noted, special education lags a year in reimbursement, so they need to spend their money in FY '24, let's say, and they'll be reimbursed throughout FY '25. Preliminary talks with the Department of Education, I don't think it's final yet, would be flowed directly to the charter school as well and not have to come through the district. Working on that. School facilities sent us a form to fill out. They want to know the square footage of the charter school in Mills. That was the easiest state report I ever did, so I just forwarded that on to the Wyoming Department of Education and said, hey, you guys need to do this report. But we did.
That's a good day.
And they did. So then I worked with the Department of Education. We clued in the charter school and then also school facilities, kind of like, hey, did you guys get this done? Like, I don't know how many square feet are over in that building, right? So we got that done. So that was a good win. I think one of the last questions we still have is going to be lease payment reimbursements. Talking to school facilities, I think in FY '25, I believe statute was changed, correct me if I'm wrong, went from a charter school have to wait 3 years to get lease reimbursements to now I think it's first year. So I think that Representative Brown, I knew you'd know. So I think first year, FY '25, those lease payments, what I'm hearing from school facilities, it'll have to still flow through the district, which we have a mechanism set up. We can do that. I think a bigger question this committee might have in terms of lease payments is what was the intent of the lease payments? And I was brainstorming this the other day. Is it they're in a facility right now and their lease payments are $10,000 a month and they get reimbursed that the next year? Or what happens if there's this other unique idea where they enter into maybe like a lease build scenario where this happens in I've seen this in state government, not necessarily Wyoming. They get they contract a builder and a developer to say, I need you to build us this building. You carry the note, you pay for it, and then we will lease it back from you for 30 years. And there's never an ownership change. It is purely a lease. So I think that's one, I don't know if it's ever come up, but I think it's something that would definitely need to be discussed. If that would be allowable as a public district, I'd be all about that. I'd build a $40 million elementary school, float lease payments for a year and go from there. So school facility side of things, we're getting there. We still have a little more work to do. And we appreciate WDE and Mr. Shaner's help on this. Honestly, it's been a lot of work for us as a local district. And we've probably spent tens of thousands of dollars in staff time the past 2 years figuring out this system. But like I said, we're trying to be good neighbors. We do care about all the kids in the Natrona County School District, whether they're in our district, they're at a charter school, or they're at a parochial school. Just because how it works, they might come back in the public district someday anyways, right? Or we might lose one to a parochial. Like, it kind of all one big family at the end of the day, and we do care about student achievement no matter where they're at. So with that, that kind of concludes my testimony. I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to give this committee another viewpoint from the public district side. It hasn't been easy. We're trying to be as transparent as possible with the taxpayers in our district, knowing that nobody within the district, the trustees did not authorize this. It largely just showed up on our front door one day. But I think we've done a lot of work to at least try to create some efficient processes and make it as cost effective as possible with the exchange of financial resources. So with that, I stand by for questions.
Senator Rothfuss, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the school facilities concerns in particular, and you know, maybe we can take a look at those. But one more on that side. Would we still be doing our calculation for allowable square footage on the basis of the students that are attending the state authorized charter schools in the district, so that when we're doing that allowable square footage calculation, they are incorporated even though they're not part of the school district?
Chairman Northrup, Senator Rothfuss, they are not included in our excess space calculation within major maintenance. I may have to defer to Mr. Wilmarth to confirm that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Matt.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Office, any leased square footage is excluded from the square footage in the computation of major maintenance. And recall, districts receive the lesser of their actual or their allowable gross square footage. So the students that are in the charter school, and here even locally in Albany County School District number 1, the Montessori, are excluded. And I believe in Natrona County School District, those students would be excluded since it's a leased facility.
Okay, I see that now. Thanks.
Okay, further questions? Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here in your testimony. It's super helpful. I guess you mentioned that you would gladly give up funding if it meant that you didn't have to do the work on behalf of the charter schools with like the paperwork, I guess. I'm somewhat confused because it's a state authorized school, right? So why, what needs to happen, I guess, to move that workload that you're burdened with, so that it's not the local school district who's not necessarily authorizing the school, helping get these schools started. And then, yeah, I think I'll start there and maybe have some follow-up questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Chairman Northrup. Representative Provenza. I think this might have to be another Matt Wilmarth question. It's gonna have to involve a statute change, and it's something to do, I don't know the details of it, it's something to do with the school foundation program account and the definitions of why it can't go directly to the state authorized charter. Not to put Mr. Wilmarth on the spot if you wanted to opine. That is my understanding.
Chairman Scott.
Chairman, some of the reason that the charter laws was written the way it was the concept would be that many of these charters would gradually switch from being state authorized to being district authorized, that once they got established and going, that the hope was that they would be able to negotiate a deal and essentially become a locally authorized one. And that was to reduce the burden on the 5 elected officials who were originally put in. And so that, you may have to rethink some of the statute. That was what was going on.
Matt, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'll try not to get too much in the weeds. I'll keep it a little bit higher. There's a couple of things at play. First, regardless of the authorizer, a charter school is a school within the school district. So let's first make that a basic understanding. It's a public school within the school district. The school districts through the foundation program are the only entity allowed to participate from payments from the school foundation program account. Individual schools are not. So that's, the foundation program is a formula that looks at both a local revenue of a school district and the foundation program amount. And we subtract to determine an entitlement and a recapture amount. So the mechanism in place, the formula in place, contemplates a district level resource amount. And statute is clear that a school or a charter school is entitled to the amounts specified in 21-3-314, or an alternative budget that the charter school, regardless of the authorizer, that they negotiate a separate budget with the district. So a district can negotiate, or the charter school can negotiate with a district on an alternative budget. So the mechanisms are there to allow flexibility, and having the district make another payment from their custodial account works. You know, we don't get into the minutia of, well, reducing Natrona County's foundation program amount for computation of cash reserves by the charter school amount. You know, we haven't gone that level of detail. The elements work. It's another step for the district, but I will argue they get the central office amount to do some of this work. They get the central office per 80 amount. They retain that under the current law. I think that's maybe a fair share of their administrative costs associated with doing that. But again, the mechanisms work. Are you done on your line of questioning there? Because I do want to follow up with Senator Office on major maintenance. I can come back. On the major maintenance, and again, I know this isn't the school facilities committee, but we don't include charter schools in the major maintenance if they're leasing. But we also, on the leasing side, require the lessor to maintain that lease amount to the major maintenance standards. And that payment is paid to the district, and the district is required to pay that to the charter school. And so that's the reason why we exclude that lease square footage, is because we include in the major or the lease amount that they have to maintain it at the major maintenance adequacy standards. So.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you. All right, further questions? None appearing. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. I'll just say that I'm looking forward to continued conversation on this issue. I won't take it up today. There's a lot for us to look into, a lot for us to assess with regard to cost. We do know that the single largest escalator in the school foundation program is when we add a new school. That the charter schools are new schools. It's not just ADM calculations. It is incorrect to say money follows the kid. A new school, period, costs the state more. So discussion I'm looking forward to having at a future time for us to talk about. Also just want to remind folks that there is not just one way to authorize charter schools. We still have district authorized charters. That's still available. We have not had our doors beat down with people asking to authorize charters through local school districts. In that case, there is no funding. The board doesn't get paid. The school board doesn't get paid. The district absorbs the cost. And so that is a cost zero to the state, whereas the application process through the state authorizer does have cost. So there is still another option, and we have great locally district authorized schools. Two of them here in this district. You ought to check them out. They're wonderful schools.
Very good. Questions for Brian? Go ahead, Representative Obermiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ken, and is it also true that an existing school can change to be a charter school?
Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, short answer, yes, but not for all reasons. For example, a school can't do it just to keep from closing. So short answer, yes.
Representative Berger, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And real quick, why aren't charters beating down the doors to go with the, partner with the school district to create a charter? Why aren't they using that mechanism? Or is it because lack of knowledge about there's two ways to get to license a charter? Or
Mr. Chairman, I sure couldn't answer that question. I just don't know what those applicants are thinking. I can tell you that the process of application, either through a local district or a state, is a tremendously burdensome process. We ask a lot of the applicant because we're saying, hey, we're going to trust you with our kids. So we're asking that you prove a lot, provide a lot. And so I think that sometimes the process itself scares people away. But the folks that we have heard from lately have inquired with local districts, but seem to be a little bit more interested in applying with the state. Whether that's a perception that that's an easier process, I don't know. But typically I can tell you that there's one entity that I'm aware of that has approached numerous school districts talking about the possibility of authorizing a charter in their district. And that entity has really kind of relied on, I think we would rather go through the state.
Further questions for Brian? Thank you, sir. Anybody else, public comment? Okay, we will close public comment. Committee, any directives? I heard something about a white paper that was gonna talk about reimbursable costs and a bureaucratic mismatch. And also maybe looking at a letter to appropriations. Those are what I heard. Yes. Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just kind of curious. I honestly forgot that, you know, the LEA legislation that we debated and debated and debated over the course of 2 years was ultimately vetoed because it got amended so much. I'm kind of curious what the committee's feelings are about bringing that bill back from the Joint Education Committee clean. And having that cleaned up and bring that forward for our next session. If the committee likes that idea, I could make the motion, or the chairman could certainly just direct LSO to do so for our next meeting, but that's one of the options that I've heard out of this.
Well, I like the idea personally. Okay, we're getting some head nods. So let's pull the bill back up and bring it for next time, and we'll see if we can clean it up. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, on that, do you want the clean Joint Education Committee version that passed out of JEC then?
That's right. and
Unamended?
That's what we'll start with. Anything else? Going once. Matt, please go ahead.
Well, Tanya and I were going back and forth. Do you want an alternative, a separate bill as well that took the second piece of that legislation, which I think dealt with the timing of the payments? You know, do you want to bring that concept as a separate piece of legislation as well to debate?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you recall, there were
Yeah.
two elements to that bill draft that was discussed by the Joint Education Committee. One was the LEA, and then the second was the timing of the payments. But the bill that was vetoed only dealt with the LEA issue. Senate File 61, I think is.
Yes, you're right. And we need to bring that timing of the payments back in. That was part that failed in a bill.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that's part of the discussion that Mr. Flynn from Natrona County had kind of brought up. There were several concepts he brought up. I don't know what of those you want to bring up for consideration. It's, I think, omnibus charter school bill or separate bills. You know, it's certainly the committee's choice.
Mr. Chairman. My thought is that we better keep the LEA issues separate from other things because of the veto problem.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
I guess it would be my suggestion to just bring that bill back, if the committee wants to bring that bill back with only the LEA aspect, and then maybe we can put on the agenda additional consideration of the timing, because it almost seems to me, based on the testimony, that maybe we didn't have it right in that bill. So we could explore whether we need to bring some legislation about the timing, but I don't know that that bill was the final vehicle based on our testimony today. I guess I don't have a sense of it.
I don't either. To refresh our memories, could you also throw that bill on the payment timing in our packet next time so that we're all up to speed on the same page? That cover it? Anything else? Nothing else appearing. We will be adjourned till 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you.